The contract arrived on a Monday, and Violet Corrigan read it 3 times before she understood what was being asked of her. The first time she read it the way she read every contract, with the full level attention of a woman who had learned at her father's knee that the words a document chose to use were never accidental, and that the words it chose to avoid were never accidental either. She was 44 years old. She had worked as a licensed property appraiser and territorial notary for 16 years, certified under the authority of the New Mexico Territorial Land Commission, and recognized in 3 county courts as an expert witness in boundary and title disputes. She had an office in Albuquerque on 2nd Street, a south-facing room with good winter light, and a reputation built carefully over a decade and a half of work that was correct the first time and did not require explaining afterward. She read the contract a second time looking for what was not there. The third time she set it on her drafting table and looked at the ceiling and let the full shape of it settle around her. Santa Fe Basin Land Company, a corporate charter registered in the territory of New Mexico in 1879. She had heard the name twice before, once in a conversation at the Land Commission office about a disputed grazing certificate in Bernalillo County, and once in a letter from a colleague in Las Cruces who had asked, in the careful language of a professional being careful, whether she had any knowledge of the company's principles. She had written back that she did not. She had filed the letter in the drawer she kept for things she did not yet have the right words for. The contract asked her to conduct appraisals on 14 parcels of agricultural and ranch land in Guadalupe County, in the high country east of the Pecos River. In the region, the old Spanish maps called the Llano Estacado, the staked plains named for the yucca stalks, early travelers had driven into the ground as trail markers across the featureless grass. The parcels were described in the contract as abandoned or marginally occupied agricultural claims, requiring fresh evaluation for potential commercial development. The fee offered was more than she typically earned in 3 months of standard commission work. Violet looked at the phrase abandoned or marginally occupied. She thought about what that phrase was doing in a contract from a land acquisition company. Then she wrote a letter of acceptance, folded it, sealed it, and handed it to her assistant to post before she could change her mind. She packed her instrument case, the worn black leather one her father had given her the summer she turned 26, the year she passed the territorial examination, and he had looked at her across his own drafting table with the specific expression of a man who has taught someone everything he knows and is watching them arrive at the moment where they exceed it. He had not said anything elaborate. He had said a deed is only as honest as the person who reads it. Then he had given her the case with his name on the front, Edmund A. Corrigan, and her name added beside it, V.M. Corrigan, in a smaller stamp. She bought passage on the eastbound stage from Albuquerque to Las Vegas, New Mexico, and then hired a sound Rowan Mare at the livery there for the 2-day ride south into Guadalupe County. She rode out on a Tuesday morning in October with the contract in her coat pocket, the instrument case across the pommel, and the specific sensation she had learned over 16 years of this work to distinguish from anxiety, not dread of what was coming, but the sharp and clarifying alertness of a woman who has read between the lines of a document and suspects correctly that she is riding towards something that will require everything she has. Bam! Guadalupe County in October had the spare, clean beauty of high country grassland at the end of a dry summer. The buffalo grass gone from green to tawny gold, the air carrying a thin edge of cold from the east off the Llano, the sky enormous and pale blue above the breaks, where the land dropped toward the Pecos drainage. She had not been in this part of the territory before. She knew it from survey maps and general land office plats, knew the drainage patterns and the approximate locations of the original Spanish land grant boundaries and the homestead claims that had been filed under the Desert Land Act and the Timber Culture Act in the years since the territory came under federal administration. She knew it the way a woman who reads land records knows a place in abstraction, in the language of bearing lines and chain measurements and recorded acreage, which is not the same as knowing it in the way a person who has ridden it in every season knows it, but which is not nothing either. The first parcel on her list was designated Flood Terrence Claim 320 acres, filed 1871, located 4 miles west of the Pecos tributary crossing on the county road. She found the gate at mid-morning of the second day's ride, a cedar post gate with a wire latch and a board with flood burned into the wood in careful, deliberate letters. The house beyond it was a low adobe structure with a tin roof and a kitchen garden along the south wall, and a sound barn behind, not prosperous, but maintained with the steady, unsparing care of people who understand that what they have is exactly what they have built, and that nothing will maintain it but their own continued attention. There was a woman in the kitchen garden. Violet reined up at the gate and looked at the woman for a long moment before she understood that the word abandoned the word the contract had used to describe this parcel was not simply inaccurate. It was a deliberate lie. The woman was perhaps 67 or 68 years old, stout and weathered with the specific steadiness in her carriage of someone who has been doing hard physical work outdoors for most of her adult life and has reached the age where she does it more slowly but with no less precision. She was turning the last of the season's garden, underworking a fork through the rocky soil with methodical patience. When she heard the horse at the gate, she set down the fork and looked up without alarm, the unhurried look of a person who sees riders on this road regularly enough not to be startled by them. "I'm looking for the flood claim," Violet said. "You found it," the woman said. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the gate. Her eyes were dark and steady under a sun-bleached hat brim, and they read Violet with the frank, unembellished attention of a woman who has been reading strangers for a long time. "Agnes Flood, this is my place." Violet looked at her. She looked at the house and the garden and the barn. She thought about the phrase abandoned or marginally occupied. "Who sent you?" Agnes Flood said. "Santa Fe Basin Land Company," Violet said. "I was contracted to conduct an appraisal of this parcel." Something moved through Agnes Flood's expression, not fear exactly. The specific controlled quality of a person who has been expecting a particular piece of news long enough that when it arrives they receive it with the grim precision of someone who had hoped to be wrong. "Come inside," Agnes said. "I've been expecting someone." The inside of Agnes Flood's house told the story of a life built with care and without waste. A cast iron stove that had been in service long enough to have been repaired twice. A dresser with a mirror, its silver foxing at the corners, holding a crocheted runner, and a photograph of a younger Agnes beside a man who would have been her husband. The specific, upright quality of people who understood that a photograph would outlast them and wanted to be found in it as they actually were. A pine table with 4 chairs, one of which had a cushion tied to the seat. Braided rugs. A bookshelf with 2 shelves of books, a Bible, and a tin box on the top shelf that Agnes went to immediately. She put the tin box on the table. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make coffee." Violet sat. She set her instrument case on the floor and her hat on top of it and looked at the tin box. It was the kind of box a person uses for papers they need to keep safe, flat, with a fitted lid, the sort sold at general stores throughout the territory for the specific purpose of protecting documents from moisture and fire. Agnes made coffee in the practiced, economical way of a woman who has done everything in this kitchen so many times that the actions have become a form of thought, something that runs in the background while the mind is occupied with weightier things. She poured 2 cups and set them on the table and sat down across from Violet and looked at her with the same frank, assessing attention as before. "How many of us are on your list?" Agnes said. 14 parcels, Violet said. Agnes nodded slowly. "Then they've moved faster than I thought." She opened the tin box. Inside were papers, folded documents, carefully preserved, some of them old enough that their edges had gone brittle and brown. She selected one and unfolded it on the table and turned it so Violet could read it. Violet read it. It was a land grant certificate, a Mesilla survey certificate, dated 1854, written in Spanish in the formal and precise language of Mexican Territorial Land Administration. It certified the right of settlement and cultivation of 320 acres of agricultural land on the western Pecos drainage to one Ezra Flood resident as continuation of original land tenure established under the Mexican system of grants. It bore the signatures of the survey commissioner and 2 witnesses and the stamp of the New Mexico Territorial Surveyor's Office as of 1855, when the American administration had accepted and registered a portion of the Mesilla survey grants. Violet looked at it for a long time. Then she said carefully, "This was never transcribed into the Federal Land Registry." "No," Agnes said. "Ezra, my husband, tried to register it in '68 when the Desert Land Act office opened in Las Vegas. They told him it wasn't necessary, that the Mesilla grants were recognized under the Gadsden Treaty, and he had nothing to worry about." She paused. "Ezra died in '79. I've been here alone since." Violet looked at the certificate, at the precise Spanish legal language, at the 1854 date, at the survey commissioner's signature. She said, "Does anyone else on this drainage have documents like this?" 6 families, Agnes said. "All of us been here since before the territory came American. All of us have papers like that, some older, some the same year. None of us ever got them put into the federal books because we were told we didn't need to. She looked at Violet steadily. Now this land company is telling the federal court we don't have valid title, that our papers are foreign documents and not legally binding under American land law, that the land is unoccupied and available for commercial appropriation. She folded her hands on the table. Are you here to help them do that to us, Miss Corrigan? Or are you here to tell me that paper isn't worth what I think it is? Violet looked at the woman across the table, the steady, direct, unfrightened gaze of a person who has worked this land for 30 years and is asking the only question that matters. I don't know yet what I'm here to do, Violet said honestly. I read the contract I was given and I wrote out here. What I've found since I arrived is not what the contract described. She paused. What I can tell you is this, I can read that document. Not many people in this territory can. The formal Spanish legal language of the Mesilla survey period is not widely known. What I can also tell you is that what's written in it is not nothing. She met Agnes's eyes. Give me 2 days. I want to visit the other parcels on my list. Agnes looked at her for a long moment, with the careful measuring attention of a woman who has been given reasons to be cautious about strangers bearing contract papers. The Vela family is 3 miles south, she said finally. Tell them Agnes sent you. By the end of the second day, Violet had visited 5 of the 14 parcels on her list. Not one of them was abandoned. Not one of them was unoccupied. Each one was exactly what it appeared to be from the road, a working homestead or small ranch maintained with varying degrees of prosperity, but with the common thread of people who had been here a long time and understood the land they were on in the specific, non-transferable way that comes from decades of working it in every season. The Vela family, Hector's parents, elderly, now still running a small cattle operation with 2 of their adult children, had papers dating to 1851. The Reyes family had a grant certificate from 1848 and a supplementary claim filed under Mexican land law in 1853. The Sandoval operation had documents in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and what appeared to be a survey notation in the original Pueblo land use tradition that predated even the Spanish grants. Every document was in Spanish. Every document was old. Every document described land that was currently occupied by people who had no idea they were being described in a corporate land acquisition filing as holding no valid legal title. On the evening of the second day, Violet sat in the Vela family's kitchen with the 5th set of documents spread before her and looked at the particular passage she had now seen in slightly different form in every set of papers. The clause establishing continuous land tenure from the original grant through the American territorial period, citing the Gadsden Purchase Treaty of 1853 as the instrument of recognition. The Gadsden Treaty had explicitly preserved the property rights of Mexican citizens living in the ceded territory. It had not required re-registration under American law. The Mesilla Survey of 1854 had been conducted precisely to document those existing rights under the new administration. What Santa Fe Basin Land Company was arguing what the contract in Violet's coat pocket was designed to support was that because these documents had not been transcribed into the federal land registry system established after 1862, they did not meet the evidentiary standard required by the current federal courts for title dispute proceedings. It was not technically fraud, it was worse than fraud. It was the use of a procedural gap, a technical failure of administrative follow-through, to erase 30 years of rightful occupation and turn legitimate land tenure into legal invisibility. Violet rolled up the Vela documents, carefully tied them with their original string, and handed them back to the elder. Mrs. Vela, who had been watching her read with the contained patience of a woman accustomed to waiting for people from the outside to understand what she already knew. These are valid documents, Violet said. They are the kind of documents I know how to work with. But I need to be honest with you, I was hired by the company that is trying to take this land. I cannot continue in that capacity. She paused. I am going to find someone who knows this ground and the people on it. Then I want to come back and talk to you again. Mrs. Vela looked at her for a long moment. Then she said in Spanish, My son Hector is the deputy sheriff. He cannot help you. His sheriff is this company's man. But there is a rancher north of Agnes Flood's place. His name is Morrow. He was a judge once. He knows the law. She said it with the precise, careful quality of a woman offering a gift. She is not certain will be accepted, the quality of someone who has been let down before and is making the offer anyway because the alternative is worse. Thank you, Violet said. She rode north in the October evening with the Llano Estacado going dark gold on the eastern horizon in the first real cold of autumn, moving in from the high country. And she thought about the contract in her coat pocket and what it had been designed to do and what she had been designed without her knowledge to help it do. She thought about her father, about the phrase he had used so often that she had stopped hearing it until she was old enough to understand why he repeated it. A deed is only as honest as the person who reads it. She had read this one honestly. She knew what it said. She found the Morrow place at dusk, a well-built ranch house of adobe and cut sandstone set back from the county road on a low rise, with a working barn and corrals and the evidence of a cattle operation that was modest but sound. The kind of place built by someone who understood that permanence came from doing things correctly the first time and maintaining them afterward without complaint. She was still 200 yards from the gate when a man came out of the barn and stood in the yard watching her ride in. He stood without urgency, without alarm, the specific stillness of someone who has heard the horse from a good distance and has had time to decide how he receives an unfamiliar arrival. I was tall and built broadly through the shoulders, with the particular kind of leanness that comes not from age or want, but from a life spent in outdoor work. The kind of leanness that is actually a form of efficiency, the body refined to exactly what it needs to be for the work it does. His hair was dark, going fully silver at the temples, and his face had the weathered quality of a man who has spent a long career working in difficult country and looking at hard things directly. He wore no jacket in the October cold, only a work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, and his hands were large and scarred in the way of a man who has done everything with them. Built things, repaired things, held a gavel, and now spent his days at work that required them. He looked at her with the level, unhurried attention of a man taking an accurate reading. Morrow, she said. Declan Morrow, he said. Not a question. Not a welcome exactly. The plain identification of a man who answers to his name. Violet Corrigan, she said. I'm a notary and property appraiser out of Albuquerque. Agnes Flood sent me. Something moved through his expression at the name, not surprise, but a specific attention, the kind that means a name has weight. Come down off your horse, he said. I've got coffee on. His kitchen was the kitchen of a man who lives alone and has made peace with it, clean, functional, without the accumulated softness of domestic life, shared with another person, but without the deliberate austerity of someone performing solitude either. A stove, a pine table with two chairs, a shelf with a small row of books, legal volumes she noticed, and a few histories of the territory. An oil lamp already lit against the coming dark. He set two cups on the table and looked at the instrument case she had placed on the floor beside her chair and said, "You're the appraiser they sent." "I was," she said. "I'm not anymore." He looked at her with the specific quality of a man deciding whether to believe something he wants to believe. "What changed your mind?" he said. "The parcels are occupied," she said. "Everyone I visited. Not marginally, their working operations people have been on that land for 30 years in some cases. The contract described them as abandoned or marginally occupied. It did so deliberately." She held his gaze. "I was hired to produce appraisal documents for a trusteeship proceeding that the company intends to file in federal court. The appraisals were designed to establish market value for land, that once the court rules that the current occupants have no valid title, the company will acquire at acquisition rates." She paused. "I was the instrument. I didn't know until I got here." Morrow looked at his coffee cup. He looked at the lamp. He looked at her. "No one's going to argue the Mesilla grants are invalid in a federal court," he said. "Not in front of a judge who knows the law. Santa Fe Basin's legal team isn't arguing the grants are invalid," she said. "They're arguing the documents haven't been properly certified under the current federal evidentiary standard for title disputes. The families never transcribed their certificates into the federal registry. They were told they didn't need to under the Gadsden Treaty provisions. The company is using that administrative gap to argue the documents are, as they put it, unverified foreign instruments not admissible as evidence of valid American title." Morrow was quiet for a moment. "That argument would work in front of the wrong judge," he said. "Yes." He set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of a man who is managing a reaction he has decided to manage. "How many families?" "6 that I found with Mesilla certificates. Possibly more. 14 parcels total on the company's filing." She met his eyes. "The documents are in Spanish, old legal Spanish, Mesilla survey period. The families have held on to them, but most of them can't read them. They know they're important, but they don't know exactly what they say or how to use them." And you can read them, he said. My father was a territorial notary and land magistrate, she said. He worked in both the American and the Mexican-American legal traditions. He taught me to read survey documents in both languages because he believed that a person who could only work in one legal tradition was only half equipped for this territory. She paused. I may be the only working notary in this part of New Mexico who can read, translate, and certify those documents in a form the federal court will accept. Morrow looked at her for a long, quiet moment. There was something in his expression that she would think about later. The specific quality of a man who has been presented with a situation he recognizes in his bones, who understands all of its dimensions and all of its costs, and who has very good reasons not to engage with it, and who is fighting against his better judgment that those reasons are not quite sufficient. You don't need me for this, he said. You could take what you have to the territorial attorney's office in Santa Fe. You could file a complaint with the Federal Land Commission. I could, she said, and I intend to eventually. But the court filing has a deadline 30 days from when the company submits its trusteeship petition. Once the petition is accepted and the deadline passes without a proper title challenge, the court defaults in the company's favor. She held his gaze. I need to work quickly, and I need someone who knows this drainage and the families on it, not as names on a parcel list, but as people who will open their doors and hand over documents they've been guarding for 30 years. You are the person Agnes Flood sent me to. I was silent for a long time. The lamp threw its steady light across the table between them. Outside, the October wind moved through the corrals, and somewhere in the dark, a horse shifted and settled. The Pecos country at night had a specific quality of stillness, not the silence of a place without life, but the deep working quiet of land that does not require human noise to be fully itself. Agnes has been on that claim since '68, he said. It was not addressed to Violet particularly. It was the kind of statement a man makes when he is reminding himself of something he already knows. She told me, Violet said. Her husband Ezra helped me set my north fence line the first winter I was here, Morrow said. We lost 3 head to a hard freeze in '71, and they came over without being asked and helped us dig out. He looked at the table. Old Bautista Vela Hector's father has been running cattle on that south pasture since before there was a county office to file with. That family has been in this drainage since the Spanish land grants. He paused. The Reyes children ride past my south fence to get to the county school. He said these things not with sentiment, but with the flat, precise quality of a man itemizing a set of facts, establishing for his own benefit what the actual stakes of a situation are. I need someone who knows which families will trust a stranger with papers they've kept safe for 30 years, Violet said. I need someone who can confirm the physical boundaries of the claims against the original survey plat positions. And I need someone whose word carries weight in this county if what I put together has to be defended in a proceeding. She paused. You were a federal judge for 12 years. That is not nothing. Something shifted in his expression. Quick and controlled the movement of a man hearing something that has caught him at a tender place. He did not ask how she knew. She had asked at the livery in Las Vegas before she rode south. I'm not a judge anymore, he said. I know, she said. Will you help me anyway? He looked at the lamp, at the coffee cup, at the wall where the legal volumes stood in their row. At whatever it was, he was actually looking at the thing that was not in this room, but that the question had put clearly in front of him. I'll introduce you to the families, he said finally. I won't make them any promises I can't keep. He met her gaze directly, and she recognized in his eyes the specific expression of a man setting a precise and careful limit on his own commitment. That's what I can offer. That's enough to start, she said. He nodded once in the economical way of a man who nods only when he means it. First light then, he said. I'll have horses ready. She stood and picked up her instrument case. At the door she stopped. One more thing, she said. The company's local contact, the man running the acquisition operation in this county. Do you know him? Thaddeus Corbin, Morrow said. His voice did not change. He has an office in the county seat at Santa Rosa. He's been in the territory for 6 years. A pause. He's careful, patient. He doesn't use threats when procedures will do the same work more cleanly. He looked at her. He will know you've talked to Agnes Flood before tomorrow morning. I expected that, she said. He'll know you refused the contract, Morrow said. He'll be interested in why. He'll find out, she said. There's nothing to be done about that. Morrow looked at her with the same direct level attention as before, the look of a man taking a careful measurement. You're not worried, he said. I'm worried about the deadline, she said. I'm not worried about Corbin. A man who uses procedures instead of threats is working inside a system. If the system produces the right result, the threats become unnecessary. She held his gaze. My job is to make the system produce the right result. He looked at her for a moment. Your father's daughter, he said. She was halfway through the door before she registered it. She turned. You knew my father. Morrow's expression had something careful in it, a carefulness she recognized as the specific quality of a man who has said more than he intended and is deciding how to account for it. Edmund Corrigan, he said. He certified 3 of the Messiah grant documents in this drainage when I first came here in '73. He rode out from Albuquerque to do it properly. He said, he stopped. What did he say? Morrow looked at the table. He said the documents were valid and the families had nothing to worry about. He said the Gadsden Treaty protections were clear and any competent court would uphold them. A pause. He was not wrong about the law. He was wrong about the court. Violet stood in the doorway with the October wind cold behind her. Her father had been here. He had certified these documents. He had told these families they were protected, and he had not been wrong, and they had believed him. And now 30 years later, a land company was using the gap between what the law said and what the courts were willing to enforce to strip those families of what her father had told them was secure. She had not known. She had not known, and she thought about what that meant for a long moment in the cold doorway, and then she filed it carefully in the part of herself where she kept things she needed to look at properly before she could do anything useful with them. First light, she said. I'll be at your gate. She did not sleep well that night in the small room at the County Road Inn. She lay in the dark and listened to the Pecos windwork at the shutters and thought about her father's certificates and what they had promised and what that promise had cost these families in 30 years of believing it. She thought about the contract in her coat pocket, the language she had not questioned until she was standing at Agnes Flood's gate, looking at a woman with a fork in a kitchen garden, being described in corporate documents as a marginal occupant of abandoned land. She had not questioned it quickly enough. That was the truth. She had read between the lines and felt the alertness of a woman approaching something that required care, but she had accepted the contract and ridden south, and it had taken standing in front of the thing itself. The lie made manifest in Agnes Flood's patient, steady face to make her understand fully what she had been handed. She was not going to make the same error twice. She rose before first light and washed her face at the basin and dressed and packed her instrument case with the tools she would need, the portable scale and measuring tape, the notary seal and the document press, the blank affidavit form she carried for field certifications, and the Spanish language legal dictionary her father had given her when she was 19. A battered volume with his margin annotations still visible in pencil. The careful notes of a man who had spent a career making sure he understood precisely what a document said before he put his name to it. She looked at the dictionary for a moment before she packed it. His handwriting in the margins was the handwriting of a younger man than the one she had known, tight and precise, the annotations of someone still building expertise, still writing things down to be certain of them. He had been here. He had sat in these families' kitchens and read these same documents and told them they were protected. He had believed it. She packed the dictionary and buckled the case and went out to the stable to saddle the roan mare. The Llano Estacado was going from black to gray in the east when she rode north to Morrow's gate, and the cold of the high country morning lay sharp and clear on the buffalo grass, and the first meadowlarks were beginning somewhere in the dark below the drainage, and the whole country had the particular quality of early light that Violet had always found easier to face than the hour before it, not gentler but honest about what it was. Morrow was at his gate when she arrived. He had 2 horses ready, the sound buckskin. He rode himself in a solid paint with good feet that he handed off without ceremony, and she appreciated the lack of performance in it. He looked at the instrument case across her pommel and at the roan she had returned to the inn stable, and he did not comment on either. They rode south along the drainage as the light built from the east. He rode this country the way a man rides terrain he has been answerable to for a long time, not with the showy ease of a man performing his knowledge of a place, but with the settled economical comfort of someone whose body has simply learned the ground beneath it. He named things as they came on them, the limestone ledge above the east bank, where the Pecos ran shallow in dry summers, the cut bank section, where the flood of '78 had taken out 40 yards of the county road, the spring that ran year-round below the sandstone bluff, and made the quarter section above it worth twice what the dry sections around it were worth to anyone who understood water in this country. She listened and looked and began to build in the systematic way. She built everything she needed to know a working picture of the drainage and its properties. The Sandoval claim, she said. I had it on the list but didn't reach it yesterday. What can you tell me? Old Celestino Sandoval died 2 winters ago, Morrow said. His daughter runs it now, Petra. She's 48, knows the land better than anyone on this stretch, except maybe Bautista Vela. He paused. Her documents are the oldest on the drainage. 1848, before the Gadsden Purchase, before any of the American survey work. He looked at her sidelong. They're in 3 languages. Agnes mentioned that, she said. The Spanish layer and the Mexican administrative certification are standard Mesilla survey format. The 3rd layer is a Pueblo land use statement in the original notation system. It establishes that the Sandoval family's presence in that valley predates the Spanish grant by at least 2 generations. He rode in silence for a moment. There is no federal evidentiary category for Pueblo land use documents. That's a problem, she said. That's the point of the problem, he said. If the court won't recognize the Pueblo documentation, the oldest claim on this drainage becomes legally invisible, which makes everything built on top of it, the Spanish grant, the Mesilla certificate, 35 years of continuous American period occupation, invisible too. Violet rode in silence, working through the architecture of what he was describing. Who is Santa Fe Basin's judge? The petition is filed in the 3rd District Federal Court, he said. The district judge is a man named Hollis Crawford. He was appointed in '79. He paused in the specific way of a man measuring his words. Crawford is not corrupt in the straightforward sense. He is a man who prefers procedural clarity to messy, equitable arguments. He will follow the letter of the evidentiary rules with complete precision, which is exactly what Santa Fe Basin is counting on. A judge who follows procedure perfectly, Violet said, when the procedures have been designed to produce a predetermined outcome. Yes, Morrow said. She looked at the Llano on the horizon, the high plains going pale gold in the morning light. She thought about her father's certificates in Agnes Flood's tin box. She thought about what 30 years of believing something was secure felt like when you discovered in October of your 68th year that the security had always rested on the assumption that the courts would do the right thing. The Gadsden Treaty is federal law, she said. It is, Morrow said. A federal court can be asked to honor federal law, she said. It can, he said. He looked at her. But a territorial federal court can also claim that a procedural filing deficiency supersedes the substantive rights the treaty established. That's the argument Crawford is likely to accept. Unless the procedural deficiency is corrected before the petition is accepted, she said. Unless the documents are certified by a qualified notary and filed as valid American legal instruments before the deadline passes. He looked at her for a long moment, with the direct level attention she was beginning to understand was his way of giving something his full and honest consideration. You'd have to certify every document on every parcel, he said, in Spanish, under your seal, with a formal translation attached to each one. He paused. In 30 days. Yes, she said. That's a great deal of work, she said. I know what it is. He was quiet for a moment. You'll need a witness for each certification, he said. Someone who can attest to the identity of the document holder and the chain of custody of the original instrument. She looked at him. He looked at the road ahead. I was a federal judge for 12 years, he said. I know how to sign my name on a certification. I know you do, she said. He rode in silence for a count of 10 strides. Let's start with Agnes, he said. The work that followed had the character of work that knows it, matters not the clean, efficient character of commission work in an Albuquerque office, with clear parameters and established procedures, but the harder, more uneven character of work being done against a moving obstacle in field conditions, with 30 years of other people's security depending on getting it right. They rode the drainage from Agnes Flood's gate south to the Sandoval claim over the first 3 days. At each homestead, Morrow rode ahead to the gate while Violet waited at the road. He had explained without elaboration that arriving together would raise questions among families who were already on guard, and that he needed a moment to make an introduction before she came in. She waited without complaint. She understood the logic of it. What she observed from the road in those moments before she rode in was something she had not expected to observe the way these families received Declan Morrow. Not with deference, not with the particular careful performance that people give to authority figures or former authority figures in territories where authority has not always been trustworthy. With something more specific and harder to manufacture than deference. With the plain, unguarded ease of people who trust someone, not because they have been given reasons to, but because they have been given time to, which is a different thing entirely and more reliable. Morrow had been here 12 years. He had helped set fence lines and dig out frozen cattle and build the county road drainage culverts and sit at the school board meetings. He had not been a judge here. He had been a neighbor. The families on this drainage did not know him as a former instrument of federal authority. They knew him as a man who showed up when things needed doing. This was Violet was beginning to understand not nothing. This was in fact everything. At the Vela, place the third homestead, they visited. Old Bautista Vela brought out a bottle of brandy he had been saving for his grandson's baptism and set it on the kitchen table next to the tin box of documents. And when Morrow said he didn't think the occasion called for it yet, Bautista looked at Violet and said in Spanish, "Your father drank with me in this kitchen when he was here. He said our papers were good. Are they good?" Violet looked at the documents spread on the table before her. The 1851 grant certificate, the 1853 supplementary claim, the 1855 territorial registration stamp. "They are good," she said in Spanish, "and I am going to make certain that a federal court says so." Bautista looked at her for a moment. Then he poured 2 fingers of brandy into the cups on the table, one for Violet, one for Morrow, none for himself, and said, "Your father was a good man. You have his eyes." She did not look at Morrow when he said it. She picked up her pen and began the formal certification language in Spanish, in the precise and careful hand her father had taught her, and she did not allow herself to think about anything except the work. The work was what was available. The work was what was needed. She had always understood that. She was simply here finally working on something that made her understand why her father had always said it like it was not a discipline but a gift. On the 4th day, riding back along the east bank of the Pecos in the late afternoon, with 6 certified documents in her instrument case, and 8 more to go, Morrow said, "You haven't asked about the contract yet." "The contract," she said. "You returned the advance and told them you were withdrawing," he said. "They'll have received that letter by now." He wrote in the calm, unhurried way of a man raising a subject he has been carrying for several days and has finally decided to set down. "What do you expect them to do about it?" "Nothing immediately," she said. "Corbin is patient. He'll wait to see what I do next before he decides how to respond." She looked at the Pecos running amber in the late light. "He doesn't yet know I can read the documents." Morrow rode in silence for a moment. "When he finds out, he'll come and talk to me," she said. "He's not the kind of man who uses threats when a conversation will do. He'll make an argument, a reasonable-sounding one." She paused. "He's good at that." "You've dealt with men like him before," he said. "I've read enough contracts written by men like him to understand how they think," she said. "They believe the world is a set of procedures, and that whoever controls the procedures controls the outcome. They're not wrong most of the time." She looked at him. "The way to beat them is to use the same procedures more correctly than they do." He looked at her with the specific expression she had seen twice before, the expression of a man encountering something more thoroughly considered than he had prepared for. "Your father taught you that," he said. "My father taught me everything I know about land law," she said. "He also taught me that the law is only as honest as the people who apply it. He spent his career applying it honestly and believing that was sufficient." She paused. "I'm not sure he was right about that, but I'm going to try to be." Morrow said nothing. They rode in the last of the afternoon light, the Pecos making its cold sound below them, the Llano Estacado going from gold to rust on the horizon, and the air carrying the particular smell of the high country in October, dry grass and cold stone, and the faint mineral edge of the Pecos in its autumn channel. Violet had been in this country for 5 days, and it had already done something to her sense of proportion, made the Albuquerque office feel very far away, and the work she had done there feel very small, and this stretch of river and these families and these documents feel like the actual thing, the work that the Albuquerque practice had only ever been training for. She did not know what to do with that recognition yet. She filed it in the place where she kept things she needed more time to look at properly. "First light tomorrow," she said. "I'll have horses ready," he said. She rode north toward the inn in the last of the light, and she heard his horse turn south at the fork in the road toward his own gate, and she did not look back, and the October dark came in from the Llano, with the cold and the stars enormous in the dry air above the Pecos country, and she knew that tomorrow would ask everything she had, and she found entirely prepared to give it. The work of the second week settled into a rhythm that Violet had not anticipated, the rhythm of serious work done in serious country, with someone who understood both without being told. They rode out at first light each morning and rode back in the early evening and ate at the kitchen table of whatever family they had been working with, or occasionally at the small inn, if the day's ride had taken them too far south to return to the county road by dark. They covered the drainage from the Sandoval claim at the southern end of the parcel list to the two northern homesteads that Violet had not yet visited, the Widow Parham's dry farm operation and the Gutierrez family's cattle claim in the Cedar Breaks above the Pecos tributary. By the end of the 8th day, 11 sets of documents had been fully certified under Violet's seal, with formal Spanish to English translations attached, and Morrow's witness signature on each. 3 more remained. At each homestead, the pattern was the same, and its sameness was not boring, but illuminating the way repetition of a thing you care about reveals aspects of it that a single encounter cannot. Each family received them with a particular combination of relief and caution, of people who have been told their legal situation is serious and are now being asked to trust that the woman with the notary seal is actually there to help them. Each tin box or leather pouch or fold of oilskin produced a document, sometimes one, sometimes a sheaf that had been kept with the careful, constant attention given to irreplaceable things. And each document, when Violet unfolded it on the kitchen table and began to read the old formal Spanish of the Mesilla survey period, produced the same response in her, the quiet, absolute certainty of a professional encountering genuine legal instruments that said exactly what they said and meant exactly what they meant, regardless of what any corporate petition was attempting to argue about them. She read them the way her father had taught her to read everything, with the full level attention of someone who understands that what a document says and what people claim it says are two different questions, and that her job is to establish the first one with such precision that the second one becomes unanswerable. Morrow watched her work. She was aware of this, not in the way that makes a person self-conscious, but in the way a person is aware of a steady light source at the edge of their field of vision. He did not watch in the manner of supervision or management, or even the kind of interested observation that men sometimes direct at women doing work that surprises them. He watched in the manner of a man who is genuinely engaged with what he is seeing, not what she looked like doing it, but the work itself, the way her mind moved through the documents, the specific annotations she made, the particular way she identified the legal meaning of a passage in 17th century administrative Spanish and translated it into the precise American legal terminology required for court certification. On the 6th day, at the Gutierrez kitchen table, he said, the phrase in the 3rd paragraph, comúnmente tenido en posesión continua, you translated it as continuously and commonly held in possession. The Santa Fe Basin filing uses claimed under common usage. The difference matters. She looked up. The difference is the whole case, she said. Tenido en posesión is a formal legal term of art in the Spanish system. It means legally held title in the full sense. Claimed under common usage suggests a squatter's right, not a property right. If the court accepts the company's translation, the document says something fundamentally different from what it actually says. Who approved their translation, he said. Someone who either doesn't know the distinction or does know it and is choosing to exploit it, she said. The first kind is incompetence. The second kind is fraud by document. He looked at the page. Can you challenge a translation in a federal evidentiary proceeding, he said. If the challenge is brought by a qualified expert witness before the document is entered into the record, yes, she said. After it's entered as evidence, the challenge becomes much harder. You're arguing against an established evidentiary fact, which requires a different and more onerous standard. She looked at him, which is why the filing deadline matters. Once Crawford accepts the petition and enters the company's translated documents, we're fighting uphill. He nodded slowly. So the certification isn't enough by itself. The certification establishes valid title, she said, but the translation challenge has to go with it. A formal expert attestation that the company's translation of these documents is incorrect in material respects. She paused. I can write that attestation, but it needs to be submitted to the right court. Not Crawford, he said. Not Crawford, she said. The company's petition is in the 3rd District. A translation challenge and title certification submitted to the 3rd District will land on Crawford's desk, and he'll handle it according to Santa Fe Basin's preferred procedure. She met his eyes. But a challenge and certification submitted to the Territorial Land Commission as a title dispute of record under the Gadsden Treaty provisions, that's a different filing. It triggers a review at the territorial level, which Crawford can't simply process and dismiss. Morrow was quiet for a long moment. Who has standing to submit that filing, he said. A qualified notary with certified translations of the disputed documents, she said. And an affected landowner. She held his gaze. Or someone who can certify standing as an agent of record for the affected landowners. He looked at the page before him. At old Magdalena Gutierrez's kitchen, the ristros of dried chiles hanging from the ceiling beams, the smell of green chile and wood smoke, and the particular warmth of a kitchen that has been the center of a family's life for 3 decades. I can do that, he said. His voice was level in the way it was level when he was deciding something and wanted to make certain he was deciding it accurately. As a former federal judge, I can certify that I have personally reviewed the original documents and witnessed their certification and can attest to their validity as instruments of title. Yes, she said. He looked at her. That would require me to put my name on a legal filing against Santa Fe Basin Land Company. It would, she said. He was quiet for a moment that had a specific weight to it, the weight of a man deciding something. He has been deciding for a while and has not yet arrived at the final step of, all right, he said. It was not reluctant. It was not impulsive. It was the specific plain word of a man who has made up his mind and said so. She looked at him. She almost said something. She decided the work was more important than whatever she had almost said, and she turned back to the document. On the 9th day, riding back along the Pecos in the afternoon, she told him about Edmund Corrigan. Not the version she had told Agnes Flood, not the compressed professional summary of a father who had been a notary and land magistrate. The actual version with its actual weight. She told it because they had spent 9 days in close company working through documents that her father had worked through before her, and because the connection between her work and his was becoming impossible to keep at arm's length, and because she had learned enough about Morrow's way of listening to understand that he would not do anything unhelpful with what she said. I was a careful man, she said. Careful about documents, careful about his work, careful about what he said to people and what he promised them. The Pecos ran below them in its autumn channel shallow over the gravel bars. He told the families on this drainage their certificates were protected. He told me when I was learning this work that the Mesilla survey grants were among the most solid title instruments in the territory, well documented, well executed, fully protected by federal treaty. She paused. He was not wrong about any of that. I was wrong about the courts, Morrow said. He believed the courts would do the right thing if presented with the right documentation, she said. He believed that enough that he told these people they had nothing to worry about, that they could keep their certificates in their tin boxes and trust the system. She looked at the Llano. He died 6 years ago. I went through his papers after and I found the certifications he had done in this drainage and 3 others in the territory. 47 families from the receipts. He had certified 47 sets of Mesilla survey documents and told all of them their titles were secure. And never followed through to make certain they were registered, Morrow said. He couldn't force the registration, she said. He could certify the documents and advise registration, which he did. But if the families were told by the Land Commission that registration wasn't required, they believed it. And he didn't, I don't know if he didn't check or checked and was also reassured incorrectly or, she stopped. Or understood that there was a gap and didn't know how to close it, Morrow said. She looked at him. That's the most honest version, she said. He was a good man doing his best work in a system that hadn't decided yet whether to honor what he was protecting, Morrow said. That's not a comfortable thing to carry. No, she said. He rode in silence for a moment. My grandfather homesteaded in Ohio before the war, he said. He built something careful and solid and left it to my father, and my father left it and came west, because he believed the territory offered something that the old settled-in places no longer did. Real opportunity, real freedom, real property that you worked for yourself and held in your own name without the encumbrance of a system already arranged against you. He looked at the breaks on the far bank. He was not wrong about that either. The territory offered it. What the territory did not always offer was the institutional machinery to protect what it offered. So we build the machinery, Violet said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. If we can. We can, she said. She said it with the simple certainty of a woman who has looked at the work and measured it accurately and found it hard but not impossible, which is the only measurement that matters. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had started to recognize, the direct, quiet, fully engaged attention. That was she was beginning to understand the closest thing he had to an unguarded face. She turned back to the road. The 10th day brought a development she had been expecting. She was at the Reyes place working through the 1848 document with old Dominga Reyes and her daughter-in-law Catalina when Morrow came in from the yard where he had been talking with Felix Reyes about the south pasture fence and said in a tone that was entirely level and informed her of nothing except that he was being entirely level. Someone rode past on the county road and looked in. She did not look up from the document. How long ago? 20 minutes. He came and stood at the corner of the table where he could see both the document and the door. One rider, County Road southbound. Corbin's man, she said. Or Corbin himself, he said. He's careful enough to do his own reconnaissance. She certified the last two lines of the translation, pressed her seal, and signed her name in the careful, deliberate way her father had taught her. Full name, no abbreviations, the signature that said, "This is a legal instrument, and I stand behind it." She handed the document to Dominga Reyes, who took it with the same careful hands that had kept it for 38 years. "This is now certified as a valid American legal instrument," she said in Spanish. "It should be kept exactly as you have been keeping it. I will file a copy at the Territorial Land Commission in Santa Fe. You don't need to do anything else." Dominga Reyes looked at the document and at the notary seal and at Violet. "Gracias," she said. It was not a thank you for a service. It was the word a person uses when they mean something more than a word can hold. "De nada," Violet said. They rode out of the Reyes yard and onto the county road, and the day was clear and cold with the full October sky enormous above the llano, and she looked south along the road and saw far off at the bend, where the road curved around the sandstone outcrop, the silhouette of a single rider sitting a horse in the still manner of someone watching. He did not move when she looked. He was too far to read his face. But there was something in the precise stillness of the man on the horse, in the way he sat and observed without concealment or threat, that she recognized as deliberate. The deliberateness of a man making certain he was seen, so that she would understand he knew exactly where she was and what she was doing. "That's Corbin," she said. "Yes," Morrow said. They rode north. She did not look back. She could feel between her shoulder blades the fact of being watched in the particular way a careful man watches something he intends to deal with on his own terms at his own time. She was not frightened. She was interested. The encounter she had been anticipating since the day she returned. The contract was moving closer, and she wanted it to arrive because the argument she needed to make was better made in person than in correspondence, and because she had been preparing her side of it since the morning she stood at Agnes Flood's garden gate. "He'll come to you directly," Morrow said. "He won't send someone." "I know," she said. "He'll want to assess what I actually have before he decides how to respond." "And when he comes," Morrow said, "I'll listen to what he says," she said. "And then I'll tell him that the filing deadline is irrelevant because the documents I am submitting are not a response to his petition. They're a separate action at the territorial level that supersedes his procedural strategy." She paused. "And then I'll be interested to see what he does with that." Morrow was quiet for a moment. "He may not accept it gracefully," he said. "Graceful isn't required," she said. "Accurate is." He looked at her with the corner of his mouth quality that was the closest thing she had seen to amusement in a man who did not perform amusement. They rode on. Corbin came on a Thursday. Violet was at the small desk in her room at the County Road Inn, working through the formal attestation document, the expert translation challenge that would accompany the certified title instruments in the Territorial Land Commission filing, when she heard horses in the yard. She looked out the window and saw two men dismounting a broad, well-dressed man in his mid-50s with the air of someone who has spent a long time in boardrooms and field offices and has stopped distinguishing between them and a younger man she recognized from a passing description as his local agent, a capable-looking individual named Ferris who handled the day-to-day business of the land acquisitions. She noted the time. She put her pen down. She straightened her papers and stood up and went to the door. Corbin was already at it. I was a big man, not tall exactly, but substantial, with the particular presence of someone who has been consequential for a long time and whose body has come to express it. His face was broad and weathered and entirely composed, and his eyes were the dark, careful eyes of a man who does not say things without having considered them. He wore a good coat and a clean hat, and he looked at her with the specific quality of a man performing a first assessment and having found it more interesting than anticipated. "Miss Corrigan," he said. He had a measured, precise voice, the voice of a man who had spent a career in rooms where words had consequences and had learned to use them accordingly. "I apologize for arriving without notice. My name is Thaddeus Corbin. I believe you know why I'm here. I do, she said. She stepped back from the doorway. Come in. He came in. He looked at the desk, the papers spread across it, the notary seal in its case, the Spanish-English legal dictionary, with her father's annotations in the margins. He looked at it the way a man looks at a document thoroughly, with the assessment of someone trained to extract information from arrangement. He sat when she indicated the chair opposite her desk. She sat at the desk. Ferris remained standing near the door. You withdrew from the contract, Corbin said. Yes, she said. May I ask on what grounds? The parcels were not accurately described, she said. The contract specified abandoned or marginally occupied land. The parcels are neither. That language reflects an administrative status assessment, not a habitation survey, he said. The legal term abandoned in a territorial land proceeding refers to the status of the title claim, not the physical occupancy. The title claims are not abandoned, she said. They are held under Mesilla survey certificates dating to 1854, all valid instruments of title under the Gadsden Treaty of 1853. The reason they appear as abandoned in the Federal Registry is that they were never transcribed under the post-1862 registration system, not because the titles were abandoned, but because the families who held them were told by the Land Commission that transcription was not required. Corbin looked at her. He did not look surprised. He looked at her with the specific calibrated attention of a man who has encountered a stronger than expected position and is recalculating his approach. You can read the Mesilla certificates, he said. I can read them, translate them, and certify them as valid American legal instruments, she said, which is what I have been doing for the past 10 days. A pause. All 14 parcels, he said. The 14 on your list and 2 additional that were not on your list but hold similar documents. She held his gaze steadily. 16 certified instruments with formal English translations ready to be filed at the Territorial Land Commission as a title dispute of record under federal treaty provisions. He looked at the legal dictionary. Your father's, he said. Yes. I knew Edmund Corrigan, he said. He said it without excess, the plain statement of a man reporting a fact with nothing attached. He was a thorough man. I respected his work. He paused. He certified those same documents in '73. I know, she said. He told those families their titles were secure, he said. He was not incorrect. Technically, the titles are valid instruments. But valid instruments and enforceable titles are not the same thing in a contested proceeding. They will be, she said, once they've been properly filed at the territorial level. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm going to make you a practical offer, he said. His voice remained the same, measured, precise, without threat. The voice of a man making an argument he believes is reasonable. 6 of the 16 families you've certified would receive fair market compensation for their parcels. Not acquisition rate, not condemnation value, but actual current market appraisal, which is incidentally your professional specialty. A pause. The remaining 10 would have their titles confirmed and their claims formally registered in the Federal Land Registry at the company's expense. No further contest. She looked at him. 6 families lose their lands, she said. 6 families receive compensation sufficient to relocate and establish elsewhere, he said. They receive more than the land is currently worth to them. He held her gaze with the direct, reasonable quality of a man presenting a case he has prepared carefully. Your father told those families their titles were secure. He was right about the law and wrong about the court. What I am offering corrects the practical outcome of that error, not perfectly, but better than the alternative. The alternative being, she said, a territorial level filing that will take 2 years to work through the commission, he said, during which time these families will continue to work their land under the cloud of a contested proceeding, unable to obtain financing, unable to clear title for sale or inheritance, unable to do any of the things that secure title makes possible. He paused. I am offering certainty. You are offering a legal process whose outcome you cannot guarantee. Violet looked at the desk, at the certified documents in the leather case beside it, at her father's dictionary with its careful margin annotations. He was not wrong about the process. A territorial filing would take time. It would require resources these families did not have to sustain themselves through a 2-year proceeding. It would depend on a commission that had its own political pressures and its own record of inconsistency. I was making the offer her father would have called the reasonable compromise. She thought about her father. She thought about what the reasonable compromise had cost the families on this drainage for 30 years. The steady, patient erosion of certainty that came from holding a right that everyone agreed was valid and that no institutional machinery had ever made permanently secure. No, she said. Corrigan looked at her. The offer covers 6 families. The offer concedes what the title instruments establish absolutely, she said. Every family on this drainage has a valid title to the land they are currently occupying. Not some of them. All of them. The answer to a valid legal right is not compensation. It is enforcement. She met his eyes. I am not making a procedural counteroffer. I am telling you that the filing I am submitting establishes rights the treaty already guaranteed in a form the Commission is obligated under federal statute to enforce. He looked at her for a long, still moment. You understand what you're taking on, he said. Not a threat, the genuine inquiry of a man assessing whether she has done the accounting she claims. I understand exactly what I'm taking on, she said. I've been doing this work for 16 years. I am not proceeding out of sentiment for my father's memory or sympathy for the families involved. I am proceeding because the documents say what they say, the law supports what the documents say, and my job is to make certain the right court reads them correctly. She held his gaze. That is the full accounting of it. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the legal dictionary one more time. At the notation on the cover, VM, Corrigan NM, Territorial Notary, Cert. Number 114. He stood. He set his hat on his head with the precise, deliberate motion of a man concluding a meeting he had prepared for differently than it went. You won't find the Territorial Land Commission straightforward, he said. I expect not, she said. I'm going to Santa Fe anyway. He looked at her with the specific expression she had not been able to read when she first saw him at the door, and now looking at it from the far side of the conversation, she understood what it was. It was the expression of a man encountering something that requires him to revise his assessment and who is being honest with himself about what the revision means. Your father would have been proud of you, he said. He said it without sentiment and without malice, the plain, unweighted observation of a man who had known Edmund Corrigan and was making an accurate comparison. He would have told me the filing process would take 2 years, she said. Yes, Corrigan said. He would have. He paused at the door. He would have filed anyway. He left. Ferris followed him without a word. Violet sat at the desk for a long time after they were gone. She thought about what Corrigan had said. Not the offer, she had already put the offer away, but the last thing. He would have filed anyway. She had not told Morrow about the conversation with Corrigan, and she found herself wanting to. Not to process it aloud, she processed things by thinking, not by speaking, but because there was something in what Corrigan had said about her father that deserved to be heard by someone who had known him, and Morrow was the only person in this county who had. She picked up her pen and returned to the attestation document. The work was what was available. The work was what was needed. She wrote until the lamp needed filling, and the October dark was fully down outside the window, and then she filled the lamp and kept writing. She told Morrow the following morning. They were riding the north section of the drainage, checking the boundary positions on the last 2 uncertified parcels, and she told it the way she told him everything she thought was worth telling plainly without editorializing in the order it happened. The offer. Her refusal. The last thing Corrigan had said. He rode in silence for a count of 20 strides. He knew your father well enough to know that, he said. They worked in the same territory for 15 years, she said. Their work overlapped, not always on the same side. She paused. My father would have known Corrigan's operation. He would have understood what was being built. And he filed the certifications anyway, Morrow said, in 73. He told the families their titles were secure, she said. He was right. He just didn't finish what finishing required. She looked at the Pecos. I think he knew he hadn't finished it. I think that's why he documented everything so carefully, the receipts, the certification records, the correspondence. He was building a record for whoever came after. Morrow wrote in silence. He built it for you, he said. He didn't know it would be me, she said. He built it for whoever came with the right training and the right language and the right instruments. She paused. It was always going to be someone. He just had to trust that someone would come. Morrow looked at her with the full, unhurried attention that she had come to understand was the most honest thing about him. He trusted correctly, he said. She looked at the October Llano gold and silent on the horizon. I need to go to Santa Fe, she said. The filing has to be submitted in person. The commission requires a qualified notary to present the translation attestation before a commissioner, not just by mail. She paused. That's 4 days travel, which means I need to leave in 2 days to make the deadline. She looked at him. I need someone to be here while I'm gone. to answer questions from the families if they hear anything, to make certain Corbin doesn't send anyone to the properties in my absence. He looked at the road ahead. I can do that, he said. There's something else, she said. The filing requires a co-petitioner, someone who can certify ongoing material interest in the outcome of the proceeding. A former federal judge with a land claim in the affected drainage would qualify. She held his gaze. Your name on the filing puts a different face on it than a notary from Albuquerque acting alone. He was quiet for a long moment. That's the full ask, he said. That's the full ask, she said. He rode in silence for a good while. The Pecos moved below them cold and clear. The October sky was enormous and pale and entirely indifferent to the proceedings of county courts and land commissions. I told you I'd introduce you to the families, he said. I told you I'd witness the certifications. He paused. I told you I wouldn't make promises I couldn't keep. I know, she said. This is a promise I can keep, he said. She looked at him. All right, she said. He nodded once. When do we leave? We, she said. He looked at her with the direct, plain expression of a man who has decided something and is not interested in performing the decision. The commission requires a co-petitioner to appear in person, he said. You just said so. She looked at the road. 2 days, she said. I'll have horses ready, he said. She looked at him for a moment, the weathered face, the silver dark hair, the large scarred hands quiet on the reins. The specific quality of a man who has been in this country long enough to understand exactly what it asks, and who has decided after a very long time of deciding not to ask something back. She turned back to the road. First light, she said. The 2 days before they left had a quality Violet had not expected. Not the anxious compression of a deadline approaching, but the particular alertness of work entering its final preparation stage. She spent the first day completing the last 2 certifications, riding to the northern parcels with Morrow in the cold, clear morning, and sitting at Felicitas Parham's table, and then at old Roberto Gutierrez's desk, working through the final documents with the same full attention she had brought to the first. Felicitas Parham was a small woman of 72 who had homesteaded this section alone since her husband died in a cattle accident in 1869, and who received Violet across her kitchen table with the specific quality of someone who has been managing hard things alone for a long time and has developed a way of assessing new information that is neither cynical nor naive, but purely functional. She listened to Violet explain the certification and the filing. She looked at the notary seal. She looked at Morrow, who had known her for 10 years, and whose presence she clearly read as a form of guarantor. Will it work, she said. I believe it will, Violet said. I cannot promise outcomes I cannot control. What I can tell you is that the documents you have are valid instruments, and I am going to make certain the right authority reads them. Felicitas looked at the certified document, her husband's name on it, her own name in the line of succession, the formal Spanish language of a survey commission from 30 years ago now, carrying Violet's seal and English translation alongside it. The 2 languages side by side on the same page, like a conversation between 2 legal traditions that had never quite managed to speak clearly to each other before now. My husband believed these papers were enough, she said. He died believing it. She looked at Violet. I want to believe it too. Then believe it, Violet said. Because it is true. What he held was real. What we are doing now is making certain the courts are required to say so. Felicitas nodded once in the way of a woman who has made up her mind. She went to the shelf above the stove and took down a tin and put it on the table. Inside were 4 squares of cornbread wrapped in a cloth. For the road, she said. Santa Fe is a long ride. Violet looked at the cornbread and felt something she could not quite name. The accumulation, perhaps, of 10 days of sitting in these kitchens and understanding that what she was protecting was not abstract. It was tin boxes and cornbread and ristras of dried chiles and photographs of men who had died believing their families were secure. It was Bautista Vela's brandy kept for a baptism. It was Agnes Flood turning her garden under with a fork in the October cold, because she had been doing it every October for 30 years, and she intended to go right on doing it. Thank you, she said. She packed the cornbread into her saddlebag without ceremony, which was the only way to receive a gift given without performance. The last evening before they left for Santa Fe, Morrow came to the inn, and they sat at the table in the small common room with the certified instruments spread between them and went through the filing checklist one final time. It was the kind of work that looks from the outside, purely administrative, the verification of documents, the confirmation of page numbers and seal impressions, the organized sequence of a legal filing laid out in the precise order a commission examiner would expect to receive it. But there was a quality in the work that evening that was something more than administrative. The quality of two people sitting with something they have built together and understanding in the particular focused attention of the final preparation what it actually is. 16 certified instruments, 16 formal English translations, one expert attestation challenging the accuracy of the company's translations in 11 specific passages, one petition for territorial review under treaty provisions signed by Violet as the certifying notary and by Morrow as co-petitioner and former federal judicial officer. A chronological index showing the documented history of each claim from the original grant through the current certification. A letter of standing from Violet establishing her qualifications as a Spanish-language legal document expert. Her father had built the certifications in 1873. She was building the filing they had always needed, the thing he had trusted someone would eventually come and build. She looked at Morrow's signature on the co-petitioner's line. His handwriting was large and deliberate, the hand of a man who had signed his name to legal instruments for 12 years and had not lost the habit of making each signature count. He would have liked you, she said. She said it without planning to. It arrived as a statement plain and factual, and once it was out, she left it there. Morrow looked up from the page. Your father, she said. He had a specific way of recognizing people who did the right thing, not because it was easy, but because the alternative didn't actually constitute an alternative for them. She paused. He would have recognized that in you. Morrow looked at the page and at his signature on it. He would have recognized it in you first, he said. She looked at the certified documents spread between them on the table. At 16 families worth of legal history organized and translated and stamped and signed, ready to be carried 4 days' ride to Santa Fe and laid before a commission examiner and made permanent in the record of the territory. We leave at first light, she said. I know, he said. I've already packed. She looked at him. Something at the edge of her mouth moved. The cornbread from Felicitas Parham is in my saddlebag, she said. She makes the best cornbread on this drainage, he said. Then you should have told me when you knew I was going to see her, she said. Something settled in his expression, the particular quiet of a man who has found unexpectedly a moment of lightness inside a serious thing, and who is glad of it in the specific, unguarded way that only genuine things produce. She would have given you 2 batches if I'd said so, he said. She has a way of knowing when something requires extra. Violet looked at the table, at the 16 certified instruments, at Morrow's signature, at her father's dictionary closed on the corner of the desk. The October dark was full outside the common room window, and the Pecos moved somewhere below the inn in its autumn channel, and the Llano Estacado was invisible in the dark beyond the breaks, but it was there enormous and patient and entirely indifferent to the small heated business of human proceedings. First light, she said. I'll be at your door, he said. The ride to Santa Fe took 4 days south along the Pecos and then west through the Sangre de Cristo passes on the old Chihuahua Trail. Violet had ridden this country before she had made the Albuquerque to Santa Fe run a dozen times in her professional life for commission work and land office filings, and once in her first year of practice for the deposition in a railroad right-of-way case that had taken 3 weeks and taught her more about the limits of territorial legal proceedings than any amount of formal study. She knew the route. She did not know it. She was finding in the way she was learning it now, with Morrow beside her, who knew the Sangre de Cristo passes the way. He knew the Pecos drainage with the particular ease of a man whose body has learned terrain by years of direct accountability to it. Han named things, not for performance. He named them the way a person speaks when the silence is the right kind of silence, and the naming adds to it rather than breaking it. A spring at the base of a pinyon ridge that he had once used to water 2 exhausted horses during a winter circuit of the district. The particular limestone formation above the east wall of the Gloreta Pass that the Pueblo people had used as a waypoint marker since before the Spanish arrived, and that still served as a reliable noon position. A stretch of the high trail where in wet years the entire mountainside went to wildflowers in June, the kind of wild and uncurated beauty that the Santa Fe trail travelers had written about in their journals, and that Morrow described in the plain way he described everything simply as worth seeing if you happened to be there at the right time. She listened. She looked at the country. She thought about the certified documents in the leather case across her pommel, and about the commission examiner who was waiting at the end of this road. And she thought about Corbin's offer, and she thought about her father. On the second evening, camped in the shelter of a sandstone overhang above the trail, with the October cold coming hard from the north and the fire small and adequate, Morrow said, "I owe you an explanation." She looked at him across the fire. "I told you I left the bench because of political pressure," he said. "That's true, but it's not complete." She waited. He had the particular quality of a man who has been deciding whether to say something for a very long time and has finally reached the point where not saying it costs more than saying it. He looked at the fire the way a man looks at something he does not actually need to look at in order to think about it. In 1875, he said, there was a land fraud proceeding in the 3rd District, similar in structure to what Corbin is building now, though smaller. A cattle syndicate out of Tucson was attempting to invalidate the homestead claims of 11 families on the Mimbres River drainage in the territory of Arizona. The case was in front of me. He paused. I knew the law. The families had valid claims. The syndicate's argument was procedural, identical to what Corbin is doing, using a registry gap to argue that the original instruments weren't legally recognizable. "What did you rule?" she said. He looked at the fire. "I ruled for the syndicate," he said. "I found that the procedural argument was technically valid under the current evidentiary standard, and that the families had failed to establish registration compliance." He paused. 11 families lost their land. Violet looked at him. "You were wrong about the law," she said carefully. "Not as accusation, as inquiry." "I was right about the law," he said. "The procedural argument was technically valid. The families genuinely had not complied with the registration requirement. What I was wrong about." He stopped. Josephine was 17 in 1875. Her mother had died 2 years before. It was just the two of us. He looked at the fire. "A man came to my chambers 2 weeks before the ruling. Not a man I recognized, well-dressed, careful, the kind of errand man a careful organization employs precisely because he is not traceable. He told me that Josephine would be safe as long as I ruled correctly." He paused. "He said safe in the way that means the opposite if you don't comply." The fire moved in the cold wind. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains were dark above them, enormous and still. "You ruled for the syndicate," she said. "I ruled for the syndicate," he said. 2 weeks later, I resigned. I sold the house in Tucson and came here and built what I have now, and I have not put my name on a legal instrument since that day." He looked up at her. "Until 2 days ago." She looked at him steadily. "Did it work?" she said. He looked at her. "Did protecting Josephine work?" she said. "Is she safe?" "She's in Albuquerque," he said, "reading law through correspondence with a firm that agreed to take her on as an apprentice. She's 28 now, and she intends to sit the territorial bar." He paused. "She doesn't know about the ruling. She knows I resigned. She believes it was conscience, not compliance." He met Violet's gaze. "It was both, which is the worst kind. The thing I did was wrong, and I had a reason for it that I have been unable to decide for 8 years was adequate." Violet looked at the fire. "You protected your daughter," she said. "I sold 11 families' land," he said. "You protected your daughter," she said again. "Not a defense, a fact stated exactly. The two things are both true. They don't cancel each other." She paused. "What you've been doing for 8 years in this county with these families, that's not penance. It's not sufficient penance. It can't be 11 families lost their land. But it's the correct response to having done a wrong thing for a reason that you couldn't unlive." She looked at him. "A man who felt no remorse would not have come here and spent 8 years building what you've built." I was quiet for a long time. "I don't deserve," he started. "That is not the question," she said. She said it with the flat, certain quality of a woman who has been thinking about this, about what it meant and what it required since the moment he started speaking, and perhaps before that, since the moment at Agnes Flood's gate, when she first understood what it meant to do work that was connected to ground and consequence in the way this work was. "The question is whether you are capable of doing the right thing now in this specific situation without the excuse of extenuating circumstances. You are. You've demonstrated it for 8 years. You are demonstrating it right now." She met his gaze. "That is what counts." He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. The specific expression of a man who has confessed something he expected to end a thing, and has found instead that it has not ended it at all. "Your father," he said. "Would have said the same thing," she said. "He believed in the record. Not the record of what people did at their worst moment under duress. The record of what they chose over time when the record was all they had. She looked at the fire. You chose correctly in the long run. That's in the record too. The fire burned low. The cold deepened. The Sangre de Cristo range was enormously dark above them, ancient and indifferent and completely certain of itself, in the way only very old things can be. Sleep, she said. We have a long day tomorrow. He did not say anything, but something settled in his face, a settling that was not relief exactly, but the specific release of a man who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has finally set it down in the right hands. She did not look at him after that. She rolled her blanket and lay down with her back to the fire and the stars visible at the edge of the overhang overhead, enormous in the thin high country air. She lay awake for a long time. She thought about her father's certifications, and about Morrow's ruling, and about Corbin's offer, and about the 11 families on the Mimbres River who had lost their land in 1875, and the 16 families on the Pecos drainage who were not going to lose theirs. She thought about the specific way justice works, not cleanly, not completely, not in ways that fully repair what has been broken, but steadily in the long record, if the right people do the right work in the right order. She thought about the man on the other side of the fire and what she had learned about him over 11 days of riding this drainage and sitting at these kitchen tables and going through these documents and what she was going to do with what she had learned. She filed it in the place where she kept things that were not yet ready to be dealt with, and closed her eyes and went to sleep. Santa Fe received them on the fourth afternoon with the particular quality of a territorial capital in October, the Palace of the Governors, running its long brown facade along the plaza, the commission offices in the building to the east, the plaza itself busy with the commerce of a city that served as the administrative hub of a vast and various territory, and had been doing so in one form or another for 300 years. The Territorial Land Commission office was in the East Building second floor, a set of rooms that managed to be simultaneously official and cramped in the manner of government offices everywhere that are doing more work than they were built for. The examiner assigned to their filing was a man named David Parrish Young, for his position, meticulous in his manner, with wire spectacles, and the specific expression of someone who has been doing careful work in a complicated institution long enough to have stopped being surprised by most of what comes through the door. I was, however, surprised by their filing. Violet watched his face as he went through it, the systematic progress of a professional reading documentation, the small controlled adjustments of expression that indicated where he was finding what he had expected and where he was finding something more. When he reached the expert attestation, the translation challenge, he went still in the way of a man encountering something he had not prepared for. You're challenging the company's translation of the Messiah survey grant language, he said. I'm establishing that the company's translation is incorrect in 11 material passages, she said, which changes the legal character of the documents from foreign instruments of uncertain legal standing to valid title instruments under the Gadsden Treaty provisions. She met his gaze across the desk. The original documents say something specific. The company's translations make them say something different. The court needs to know that. Judge Crawford's court, Parrish said. Not necessarily, she said. This is a filing at the territorial level, a petition for review of title validity under federal treaty provisions. That's a different proceeding from the company's petition in the 3rd District. She paused. If this commission accepts the filing, it triggers a mandatory review period during which the 3rd District proceeding is stayed. The question of title validity comes to the commission before it goes to Crawford. Parrish looked at Morrow. And you are filing as co-petitioner in what capacity, Judge Morrow? Former Judge Morrow said. Current landowner in the affected drainage and agent of record for the petitioning families. He handed Parrish his own letter of standing. I've been riding this drainage for 12 years. I can attest to the continuous occupation of every parcel on the petition. Parrish read the letter. He read the certified instruments again. He read the attestation a second time. I took his spectacles off and looked at the desk. This is a very thorough filing, he said. It should be, Violet said. The families it protects have been waiting 30 years for someone to file it correctly. Parrish put his spectacles back on. I'll need 3 days to review this for completeness, he said. If the review is clean, I can accept it and issue the mandatory stay notification to the 3rd District Court by Friday. He paused. If there are deficiencies, there are no deficiencies, Violet said. He looked at her over his spectacles. He looked at the filing. No, he said. I don't believe there are. He gathered the documents carefully and set them in a review folder and wrote her name on the tab, VM. Corrigan, NM, Territorial Notary, in precise block letters. I'll have a receipt for you before close of business today. Thank you, she said. They stayed 3 days in Santa Fe while Parrish reviewed the filing. On the second day, a letter arrived at their inn from Corbin. It was brief, 3 sentences in the measured, precise prose she had come to expect from him. He had heard that the filing had been submitted. He wished to note that the company intended to contest the stay notification if issued. He had one further observation: she was her father's daughter, and her father had always known when a fight was worth having. And on that particular question, Corbin found he was unable to argue with him. She read it twice and folded it and put it in the instrument case. On the third day, Parrish received the filing. He handed her the official acceptance, a formal document with the commission seal, acknowledging receipt of a petition for territorial review of title validity under the Gadsden Treaty, and notifying that a mandatory stay of the 3rd District proceeding was in effect pending review. He handed it to her in the manner of a man handing over something that he knows matters, and that he is glad for once to be the person handing it. She took it. She looked at the seal. She thought about Agnes Flood's tin box, and Bautista Vela's brandy, and Felicitas Parham's cornbread, and all the October mornings she had ridden out with Morrow beside her in the cold, clear light along the Pecos. She did not cry. She put the document in the instrument case beside Corbin's letter and stood up. The families should know, she said. Yes, Morrow said. They rode out of Santa Fe the following morning in the early dark, the Sangre de Cristo behind them going from black to gray to the first cold gold of the high country dawn, and she did not look back at the capital, but forward along the trail toward the Pecos drainage, and the 16 families, and the work that was not yet finished, but had arrived finally at the stage where the record would say what it needed to say. The ride back from Santa Fe had a different quality from the ride out. The ride out had been preparation, the urgent, forward-leaning quality of work moving toward a deadline, the days shortened by the necessity of arrival. The ride back was something else, the particular, longer-lasting quality of work that has done what it needed to do and is now returning to what comes next, which is a different kind of work and requires a different kind of readiness. They rode without urgency. They stopped at the spring above the Gloretta Pass that Morrow had mentioned on the ride out and let the horses drink in the cold October afternoon, and she looked at the Sangre de Cristo spread below them toward the east and felt the altitude and the light and the specific mineral cold of the high country in a way she had not permitted herself on the ride up when the deadline had occupied the whole of her attention. Tell me about Josephine, she said. He looked up from the spring. What do you want to know, he said. What she's like, she said. You've told me what she does, what she's like. He looked at the horses drinking. She has her mother's stubbornness and my tendency to go silent when something matters too much to be careful about, he said. She reads everything. She argues with everything she reads. He paused. She rode out to the Pecos drainage with me the summer she was 16, and she asked Agnes Flood why the homestead families hadn't registered their Messiah certificates. And Agnes explained about the Land Commission telling them it wasn't necessary, and Josephine came home and said that the Land Commission was wrong and the families should sue. He looked at Violet. She was right, and I told her so, and she looked at me the way only 16-year-old women who are right can look at their fathers. Violet looked at the spring. You should tell her about the ruling, she said. About 1875. He was quiet. She's reading law, Violet said. She's going to understand it better than you expect her to. And she's going to encounter the case record at some point. It's a public document. She held his gaze. She should hear it from you. He looked at the mountains. I know, he said. It was not reluctant. It was the plain, direct word of a man who has known something for a long time and has been working himself toward it. She'll be angry, Violet said. Yes, he said. And then she'll understand, Violet said. She sounds like the kind of person who can hold two things at once, that you did something wrong and that you had a reason she can respect even if she can't fully excuse. She paused. That's a harder thing to manage than simple condemnation. I suspect she's capable of it. He looked at her. You've never met her, he said. You've described her accurately enough, she said. He turned back to the spring. The horses had finished drinking and stood patient in the afternoon cold. The Sangre de Cristo mountains were enormous and violet gray in the late light, and the whole high country had that specific October quality of beautiful things, making their final appearance before the long quiet of winter settled over them. She'll want to know about you, he said. Violet looked at the mountains. Tell her a notary from Albuquerque helped file a case. She would have argued herself if she'd been practicing 6 months earlier, she said. He looked at her with the corner of the mouth qualities she had come to find reliable. She'll have more questions than that, he said. I expect she will, Violet said. I'll answer them when she asks. They remounted and rode east. They came back into the Pecos drainage on a Wednesday evening, 5 days after they had left, and the country received them in the specific October way of land that does not know it has been the subject of legal proceedings and does not care the buffalo grass gold, and still in the late light, the Pecos running cold in its channel below the sandstone bluffs, the cedar breaks on the far bank dark green against the pale sky. They rode to Agnes Flood's gate first. Agnes came out of the house when she heard them. She stood at the gate and looked at them and looked at the instrument case on Violet's pommel and read the answer before either of them spoke. It's done, she said. The filing is accepted, Violet said. The commission issued a mandatory stay of the third district proceeding. The company cannot proceed until the commission completes its review. She paused. The review will take 6 months to a year. During that time, your claim is in the commission's record as a valid title instrument under the Gadsden Treaty. Agnes looked at her for a long moment. The October evening was going cold around them, and the first stars were beginning at the eastern edge of the sky above the Llano. And at the end of the review, she said, the commission will affirm the titles, Violet said. I cannot promise that absolutely no one can promise a legal outcome absolutely. But the documents are what they are, and I have made certain the commission examiner understands what they are. She held Agnes's gaze. Your husband's name is in the official record of the New Mexico Territory as the rightful holder of this land. That will not change. Agnes looked at the gate, at the board with Flood burned into it in her husband's deliberate letters. She did not say anything for a moment. Come inside, she said. Both of you. I have supper on. They ate at Agnes Flood's table and then rode south to tell the Vela family and the Reyes family, and then north to tell Felicitas Parham, and by the time they reached Morrow's Gate it was late, and the October dark was full, and the stars above the Llano were enormous in the cold dry air. He reined up at his own gate and looked at her. There's something I want to say, he said. She waited. I have been thinking, he said, about what you told me at the fire in the Sangre de Cristo about the record and what goes in it. He looked at the gate, the cedar posts he had set himself the wire. He had strung himself the latch that stuck in cold weather, and that he had fixed 4 times, and that would probably need fixing again before spring. I have been here for 12 years making a small, careful record of a certain kind of man in a certain kind of country. I did not expect to have the record change. He looked at her. You changed it. She looked at him. The filing changed it, she said. The families changed it. The documents changed it. You carried the documents, he said. You read them. You made them mean what they were always supposed to mean. He met her gaze in the full, unhurried way she had come to understand was the most honest thing about him. A person can do a thing like that alone. You did it with me beside you. I want you to know that I understand the difference. She looked at the Pecos in the dark below them, invisible but audible, the cold sound of water running in its old channel, running the way it had always run before any of the arguments about it began. I know you understand it, she said. Then I am saying it anyway, he said, because things that are understood sometimes still need to be said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The October cold was fully down, and the stars were bright and specific, and the whole Pecos country was very quiet. In the particular way, it was quiet at this hour. Not empty, but resting, doing the work of land that does not require daylight to continue. There will be more work after the commission review, she said. The families will need the titles properly registered in the Federal Land Registry once the proceeding is complete. Some of them will need boundary surveys. The Sandoval claim in particular, the Pueblo documentation needs to be addressed separately, which will require a different kind of expert than I am. She paused. That work will take another year at least. It will need someone who knows this drainage and these families. I know this drainage, he said. I know, she said. Are you coming back, he said. She looked at the gate, at the cedar posts and the board with Morrow and the stuck latch that he had fixed 4 times. I have a practice in Albuquerque, she said. I have commissions and a lease and a filing system that hasn't been touched in 3 weeks. She paused. I also have an instrument case and a territorial notary certificate and 16 families worth of work that isn't finished yet. She met his gaze. I'm coming back. He looked at her for a moment with the full, still attention that was the clearest signal he ever gave about the things he found hardest to say. "Then I'll keep the south fence in order until you do," he said. "That fence is always out of order," she said. "That's why it'll give me something to do," he said. Something at the edge of her mouth moved. She turned the roan north toward the inn, and he did not say anything else, and she did not look back, and the October dark was cold and clear and certain around her all the way to the county road. She did not leave the following morning. She had intended to. She had her saddlebag packed and the roan saddled at the inn stable before first light, with the instrument case strapped across the pommel and the acceptance document from the commission sealed in its envelope inside the case. She had written to her Albuquerque assistant the previous evening a brief letter explaining that she would be 2 more weeks away and asking the woman to sort the most urgent commission correspondence and hold the rest. Then she sat down at the inn's common table with her morning coffee and thought about the Sandoval claim. Petra Sandoval had her documents in 3 languages. The Spanish and the Mexican administrative certification were now properly certified and translated and in the commission's filing. But the Pueblo Land Use Statement, the oldest document in the drainage, the one that established the Sandoval family's presence, predating the Spanish grant by 2 generations, was not in the filing. Parrish had accepted the filing without it because the Spanish and Mexican period documents were sufficient to establish title under the Gadsden Treaty provisions. But the Pueblo document was real, and it was old, and it described a form of land tenure that the federal legal system had no established category for, and leaving it outside the record meant leaving the oldest claim on the drainage legally invisible. This was not acceptable. She went to find Morrow. He was at his south fence line, which was in fact out of order, a section of wire down where the October ground had softened after a rain and a post had leaned, and he looked up when he heard her horse and drove the fence tool into the post without hurrying and came to the fence line. "I thought you were leaving," he said. "The Sandoval document," she said. He looked at her. "The Pueblo Land Use Statement," she said. "It's not in the commission filing. Parrish accepted without it, but it needs to be addressed." She paused. "There is a Pueblo community advocate in Santa Fe, a man named Thomas Broken Bow, who has been working on exactly this question of Pueblo land documentation and federal recognition for 3 years. He's not a lawyer, but he knows the issue better than any lawyer in the territory. If the Sandoval document is going to get the attention it deserves, it needs someone who understands both the Pueblo legal tradition and the federal framework." She held his gaze. "I wrote to him before I left Albuquerque. I mentioned the Sandoval claim in general terms. He wrote back that he would be interested in seeing the document." Morrow looked at the fence line and back at her. "You've been planning this since before you left Albuquerque," he said. "I've been thinking about it since the day Petra Sandoval unfolded that document on her kitchen table," she said. "The planning came after." He looked at her with the full, specific attention that she had learned to read as the sign he was making up his mind about something. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Come with me to the Sandoval place," she said. "Help me explain to Petra why her family's oldest document needs to be in the hands of an expert for the next month. She trusts you." She paused. "And then I need you to write to Josephine." He looked at her. "About the ruling," she said, "before she finds it herself in the case record." He was quiet for a long time. "You said she'd be angry," he said. "She will be," Violet said, "and then she'll understand. And when she comes out the other side of understanding it, she will know that her father told her the truth when it was hard, which is the kind of thing a person reads law in order to be able to do. That is worth more than anything else you can give her in preparation for the work she's going into." He set down the fence tool on the fence rail. "First the Sandoval place," he said. "First the Sandoval place," she said. They rode south along the Pecos in the October morning, the Llano gold on the horizon and the cedar breaks dark and fragrant on the bluff faces, and the river cold and clear in its channel below, and the whole country had the particular quality of ground that has been working for a very long time, at exactly what it is, and requires no reassurance about it. This was the thing she had not expected, not the work which she had been prepared for, and not Morrow, whom she had found in the specific way that serious work sometimes produces exactly the right person in exactly the right place. What she had not expected was the country. She had known it from maps and survey records, and the particular abstraction of a professional who processes land without inhabiting it. Now she knew it the way she was beginning to understand. You could only know it by riding it in the cold mornings and sitting in its kitchens and reading the documents its families had kept in tin boxes for 30 years. and standing at the edge of the Pecos drainage in the October light, with the full understanding that what she was protecting was not a legal category, but a living thing. This specific piece of ground, these specific families, this particular river running in its old channel the way it had always run. Her father had known it too. He had ridden out from Albuquerque and sat in these kitchens and certified these documents and told these families they were protected, and he had been right about everything except the part where the protection needed finishing. She was finishing it now. It was the most thorough thing she had ever been given to do, and it was hers because he had trusted that someone would come, and she was the one who had. She thought he would have been glad. She thought he would have said the work was right. She thought he would have liked Declan Morrow. The Sandoval place came up at the bend in the river where the canyon narrowed and the bluffs rose steep on both sides, and the cedar came down almost to the water. The house was set back from the bank in a stand of old cottonwoods, the leaves going gold in the October cold, the yard with the quiet, organized quality of a working place that has been exactly this for a very long time. Petra Sandoval came to the door when she heard them. She was a compact, direct woman of 48, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's particular quality of stillness. The stillness of someone who has grown up in a place that teaches you that the land does not hurry, and that hurrying is therefore beside the point. She looked at Violet and at Morrow and at the instrument case, and she said in the plain and practical way of a woman who asks what she needs to know, what else needs doing. Violet looked at her. Your family's oldest document, she said, the one that predates the Spanish grant. I want to make certain it is not overlooked. Petra looked at her for a moment. Come in, she said. I have coffee on. The second week she was back began the way the first one had ended, with work that knew its own purpose and required everything she had. Thomas Broken Bow arrived from Santa Fe on the third day after she wrote to him, riding a gray horse and carrying a canvas satchel that clinked when he walked with the sound of books inside. He was a lean, quiet man in his 50s, Tewa on his mother's side, and formally educated at the territorial school in Santa Fe, who had spent 20 years working on the specific and largely ignored question of how traditional Pueblo land rights fit or did not fit into the federal legal framework that had been built without Pueblo consultation over and around them. He read the Sandoval document for 40 minutes without speaking, and then he looked up and said in the precise, measured voice of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing for a long time. Where did you find this? It's been in this family's possession since before the Spanish arrived, Violet said. I know that, he said. I mean, why has no one else found it? No one has been looking, she said. He looked at the document again. I can work with this, he said. It will take a separate proceeding, a different filing track entirely from the commission case. But there is a precedent from the 1870 Pueblo Lands Board that establishes the federal government's obligation to recognize pre-Spanish land tenure documentation. He paused. The precedent has never been applied, but it exists. Then we apply it, Violet said. He looked at her over the document. It will take longer than your commission case, he said. Years, possibly. I know, she said. Start it anyway. He looked at the document again, and then at Violet with the specific expression of a professional, encountering someone who understands the work the way it needs to be understood. All right, he said. I will need to speak with Petra Sandoval at length, and I will need certified copies of the Spanish and Mexican documents to establish the chain of title that the Pueblo statement sits below. He paused. I understand those are already certified. They are, Violet said. I'll have copies made for you before you leave. Petra Sandoval, who had been sitting at the corner of the table throughout this exchange with the complete contained attention of a woman listening to people talk about her family's land in 3 legal traditions, simultaneously said, my great-great-grandmother kept this document because she understood it was the deepest root. She did not know how to make the American law see it. She trusted someone would come who could. Thomas Broken Bow looked at her. Violet looked at her. Morrow, who had been standing at the window watching the cottonwoods. In the afternoon wind turned and looked at her. Someone has come, Violet said. Petra Sandoval nodded once with the specific, settled certainty of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this and has decided not to make more of it than it is. Good, she said. Then let's get to work. The work with Thomas Broken Bow occupied 3 days. The careful, methodical process of building the evidentiary foundation for a Pueblo land tenure filing, which was entirely different in structure from the Mesilla survey certification work, but required the same fundamental quality, the willingness to look at what a document actually said and build a case on that rather than on what would be convenient for the proceeding. Violet found working alongside Broken Bow that she was learning something she had not expected to learn at this stage of her career. Something about the specific way that different legal traditions talk about the same ground in terms that do not translate cleanly into each other, and that the gap between the traditions is itself a form of injustice, because it makes things invisible that are real and present and have been here longer than any of the legal systems being used to ignore them. Her father had known this. The margin annotations in his dictionary, she looked at them differently now, having worked through 3 sets of Messiah survey documents with their specific formal language. He had not just been learning a vocabulary, he had been trying to understand a way of thinking about land that was different from the American tradition. He had been trained in the idea that land is held, that it has boundaries and measurements and legal definitions, that it can be abstracted into a document, and the document can stand in for the thing itself. The Spanish and Mexican traditions had a slightly different idea of it, something more relational, more about tenure and continuous presence than about abstract title. And the Pueblo tradition had something different, still something that did not abstract the land into documentation at all, that understood the relationship between people and place as direct and prior to any paper description of it. None of these 3 traditions fully translated into the others. The gaps between them were where the injustices lived. Her father had understood this. He had certified the Messiah documents and told the families their titles were secure, and what he had not been able to do was bridge the gap between the tradition that produced those documents and the tradition that was now supposed to honor them. That was the gap she was working in. That was the gap that had needed bridging for 30 years. She was bridging it as well as she could, one certified document at a time. It was on the 12th day back from Santa Fe, a cold, clear Tuesday in November, the first real cold of the season, settling into the drainage with the specific certainty of high country winter arriving, that Hector Vela came to the inn. She recognized him from the description his parents had given her, a solid, careful man in his early 30s with his father's dark eyes and his mother's deliberate manner, wearing a deputy sheriff's badge, with the particular quality of someone who carries an emblem of authority they are not entirely certain belongs to him. He had ridden out from the county seat at Santa Rosa, and he had the look of a man who has made a decision and is not yet sure he has made it correctly, but is committed to it regardless. I took his hat off when he came in and looked at her with the frank, direct gaze of someone who has been thinking about what he wants to say and has simplified it to its essential form. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "I have the missing page," he said. She looked at him. "Agnes Flood's Messiah certificate," he said. "The witness signature page. The last page, the one that was missing when you certified it." He reached into his coat and put a folded piece of paper on the table. It was old, the same age as the rest of Agnes Flood's documents, the edges brittle in the same way the paper, the same faded cream. "The sheriff told me to take it from Agnes's file 2 years ago when the land company first made contact with the county office. He said it was for administrative review. I didn't know what it meant then." He paused. "I understand now." Violet looked at the page. She unfolded it. She read it. It was exactly what it appeared to be, the witness signature page for Agnes Flood's 1854 Messiah grant certificate, bearing the original signatures of both witnesses and the Survey Commission's certification mark. Without this page, Agnes's title instrument was technically incomplete, not void but incomplete, which was exactly the kind of marginal deficiency the company would have exploited in a contested proceeding if it came to that. With this page, it was perfect. "Why are you bringing it to me?" she said. He looked at his hat on this table. "Because my parents are on your list," he said. "Because Agnes Flood has been my family's neighbor since before I was born." He paused. "And because I became a deputy sheriff because I thought it meant enforcing the law fairly, and I have been watching for 2 years as my position was used to do the opposite of that, and I am finished with it." "Finished with the position," she said. "Finished with pretending I don't know what the position is being used for," he said. "What I do about that afterward is something I'm still working out." He looked at her. "But this page belongs with Agnes's documents. It was taken without her knowledge or consent by someone using the authority of the county sheriff's office in service of a private land acquisition company." He met her gaze. "That is theft under the color of authority. I know what that is." Violet looked at the page, at the witness signatures perfectly preserved 30 years old. "I need to add this to the commission filings," she said. It means an amendment to the filing of formal correction to one of the 16 certified instruments. That requires a trip back to Santa Fe. When, he said. As soon as I can arrange it, she said. Within the week. He nodded. I'll write a sworn statement attesting to how the page came into my possession and the circumstances under which it was removed from Agnes Flood's file, he said. That statement should accompany the amendment. He paused. It will put my badge in question. I know, she said. Good, he said. He picked up his hat. He looked at it for a moment. My father's land is on your list. My mother's kitchen had your father's certified documents in it for 30 years. He looked at her. I should have done this 2 years ago. You're doing it now, she said. That is in the record. He stood. He was a young man, she thought, younger than the gravity of what he was doing required, but equal to it regardless. That was the thing about the right kind of person. They grew into what was required of them without anyone being able to say exactly when the growing happened. Thank you, she said. He nodded and went out. She looked at the witness signature page for a long time. At Agnes Flood's husband's certificate, complete now for the first time since it had been made incomplete by a theft she had not known to report, because she had not known it had happened. She went to find Morrow. She found him at his barn working on a section of the roof that had come loose in a November wind. He heard her horse and came down from the ladder with the ease of a man for whom heights and ladders have no particular drama, and he looked at her face before she spoke. He knew from her face. Something's been found, he said. She showed him the page. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at the witness signatures and the certification mark and the brittle 30-year-old paper. Agnes doesn't know this was missing, he said. She knew the document was complete when she put it in the box, Violet said. She's never had reason to check it since. She paused. Hector Vela brought it to me. He took it from a county file where it had been placed without Agnes's knowledge. Morrow set the page down on the fence rail. The sheriff, he said. Acting on behalf of the company, she said. Hector will write a sworn statement. He looked at the page. This changes the shape of what we file in Santa Fe, he said. An amended instrument with an attached statement about how the page was separated from the original that is not just a title correction. That is a formal evidentiary record of an act in furtherance of the fraud. He paused. That could trigger a separate criminal inquiry. I know, she said. Corbin will see that, he said. I know, she said. He'll understand what it means. He's been careful not to expose himself to criminal liability. He's used procedures, not crimes. This puts his local operator in a different position. She looked at the page. The sheriff, not Corbin directly, but it demonstrates a pattern of conduct that the commission examiner will not be able to overlook. Morrow looked at her. You're using the amendment to do more than correct the document, he said. I'm using the amendment to put everything that belongs in the record into the record, she said. The document is correct. The conduct that made it incorrect is also part of the record. Both things belong in the commission's file. She met his gaze. My job is to make the record honest. That includes the parts that are inconvenient for the company. He looked at the fence rail, at the page. Agnes should know before you file, he said. Yes, she said. Today. Unhitched his horse from the barn post without hurrying, and they rode to Agnes Flood's gate in the November cold, and she told Agnes what had happened, and Agnes looked at the witness signature page with the controlled, careful attention of a woman receiving 30 years of vindication in the form of a piece of old paper that had been in the wrong hands and had now come home. She did not cry. She pressed her lips together in the way Violet had seen once before, the way of a woman who has been holding herself together for a long time and has decided that this is not the moment to stop. She took the page from Violet and held it for a moment. Then she went to the shelf and took down the tin box and opened it and placed the witness signature page in its correct position, the last page following the body of the document where it had always belonged, and closed the box. My husband would have been glad, she said. He would have, Morrow said. Agnes looked at him, at Violet, at the tin box. You'll see it's done right, she said. Not a question. We will, Violet said. They rode to Santa Fe again, the following week, a shorter trip this time with the amendment document prepared and Hector Vela's sworn statement attached, and the purpose clear. Parrish received the amendment without surprise, in the manner of a man who has been doing this work long enough to understand that important cases reveal additional dimensions the longer they are examined. He read Hector Vela's sworn statement carefully. This is a serious allegation against the county sheriff's conduct, he said. It is a factual account of an act in furtherance of a land fraud scheme, Violet said. The Commission's review of the title instruments appropriately includes the record of how those instruments were handled in the county office. Parrish looked at Morrow. "You're co-petitioner on this amendment," he said. "Yes," Morrow said. "Your history with the 3rd District Court is a matter of public record," Morrow said. "I resigned from the bench in 1875 under circumstances I intend to address in a separate filing. The co-petition on this case stands on its own merits." He held Parrish's gaze with the plain, unhurried certainty of a man who has decided to be exactly as visible as the truth requires. "I was a federal judge for 12 years. I know what valid title instruments look like. I know what fraud in a land proceeding looks like. Both of those things are documented in this filing." Parrish looked at him for a long moment. Then he accepted the amendment and added it to the file. They rode back to the Pecos drainage on a clear November morning with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains behind them, going white with the first real snowfall of the season, and the Llano Estacado, cold and enormous before them, and the whole country, with the specific quality of a place settling into itself for the long quiet of winter, knowing exactly what it is and making no argument about it. December came to the Pecos drainage, the way winter comes to the high country of New Mexico, not gradually, but in a single cold night that changed the color and temperature of everything, and made clear that the season had arrived and intended to stay. The first snow fell on a Thursday and was gone by Saturday, but the cold remained, and the buffalo grass stood pale and stiff in the mornings, and the Pecos ran slower in its narrowed winter channel, and the cedar breaks on the bluff faces were dark and fragrant in the cold, dry air that came off the Llano at night. Violet had settled into the Pecos drainage with the specific quality of someone who has stopped asking themselves whether they belong somewhere and has started simply being there. She had written to her Albuquerque assistant with instructions for managing the commission work during an extended absence. She had begun the process of establishing a working arrangement with the Guadalupe County Land Office. There was a county surveyor position that had been vacant for 8 months, and after what had happened with the sheriff's conduct in the flood case, the county commission was quietly interested in having someone with Violet's credentials in the area. She had not said yes. She had said she was thinking about it. She was in fact thinking about it in the specific way she thought about things she had already decided and was allowing herself the appropriate time to understand fully. She was working at the desk in her room at the inn. The instrument case opened the commission documents in their organized sequence, the Spanish-English dictionary with its margin annotations at the corner, when Morrow knocked on the doorframe. She had not heard him arrive. She recognized his knock, a particular quality in it, deliberate and unapologetic. The knock of a man who does not arrive unexpectedly and who wants it known that this is a purposeful visit. "Come in," she said. He came in and stood at the door with his hat in his hands and looked at her with the full, clear attention that she had come to recognize as the expression he wore when he was about to say something he had been preparing to say. "I have something to ask you," he said. She set down her pen. "Ask it," she said. He looked at the hat and back at her. "I wrote to Josephine," he said. "Last week, about 1875. He paused. "I told her everything." He paused again. "She wrote back." Violet waited. "She said—" He stopped. He looked at the desk and the window and the instrument case and back at her. "She said that she had always known something had happened that he hadn't told her. She said she was glad to know what it was. She said she was angry." He paused. "She said she was not surprised, which she said was worse than being surprised because it meant she had known on some level all along and had chosen not to press it." He met Violet's eyes. "She said she wanted to meet you." Violet looked at him. "She read the filing," he said. "A colleague at the law firm in Albuquerque mentioned it to her, a territorial land commission case with a notary named Corrigan. She made the connection." He paused. "She said tell her that our family owes hers a debt and that I intend to do something about the Mimbres River families when I am called to the bar." Violet looked at the window, at the November light on the Pecos drainage, pale and cold and entirely clear. "She sounds exactly like you described her," she said. "She sounds like her grandfather," he said, "which is the highest thing I know to say." He looked at her. "She is coming in January to see the drainage, to meet the families." He paused. "She wants to see the work you've done." "She's welcome," Violet said. He was quiet for a moment. "There is something else I want to ask you," he said. It was the specific quality of a man who has been circling something for a long time and has finally arrived at the direct approach. "Ask it," she said. He looked at her with the full and unguarded attention that was, she had understood for some time the closest thing he had to saying everything at once. Stay, he said, not for the commission review that will complete itself, whether you're here or in Albuquerque. Not for the Sandoval filing or the county surveyor position, or any of the work, though the work needs doing, and you are the right person to do it. He paused. Stay because this is the right place and this is, I believe, the right time. And because I have been this man in this country for 12 years, and I know who I am here, and I know who you are here, and I believe what we are capable of together is something that does not have a name yet, but that I would like the time to find out. She looked at him. She thought about the roan mare at the livery and the ride to the first parcel and Agnes Flood in the kitchen garden with her fork in the tin box on the table. She thought about 16 kitchens and 16 sets of documents and the ride to Santa Fe through the Sangre de Cristo passes in the cold. She thought about the fire above the Gloretta Pass and what he had told her there and what she had said and what had settled between them in the silence after. She thought about her father's margin annotations in the dictionary and what it had cost him to learn a second legal language and why and what he had done with it and what he had been unable to finish and what she had come here to finish. She thought about the county surveyor position and the instrument case and the east-facing window she had been imagining, not in her Albuquerque office, but in a different room with a different light in a country she had been learning for 2 months, and that had become without her fully intending at home. I need to go back to Albuquerque first, she said. Close out the practice properly. Transfer the commissions that can be transferred. Make arrangements. She paused. 6 weeks. He looked at her. 6 weeks, he said. I will be back in January, she said, before Josephine arrives. Something settled completely in his face. The specific, fully decided expression of a man who has been deliberating for exactly as long as the deliberation required and has now come to the end of it and finds the end of it exactly what he expected. I'll have the south fence in order, he said. That fence will not be in order in January, she said. No, he said, but I'll have made a start. She looked at him. He looked at her. The December light came through the window and fell across the desk, in the instrument case, in the legal dictionary with its annotations. And outside the window, the Pecos drainage lay in its winter quiet, cold and clear, and entirely certain of itself. First light, she said. Come and have breakfast before I ride out. I'll be at your door, he said. She left Albuquerque on a January morning when the Rio Grande Valley was still gray with winter, the cottonwoods bare along the river, and the Sandia Mountains holding their cap of snow in the cold, clear air above the city. She had done what needed doing, closed the Second Street office, and transferred the railroad commission contracts to a colleague, and settled the lease and packed her instruments into the case and her books into a trunk and arranged for the trunk to be sent east by freight while she rode west and south toward the Pecos drainage. She had not told herself this was a simple decision. It was not. 16 years of practice in Albuquerque. The office built carefully from nothing in the exact way her father had taught her to build anything worth having. The reputation she had earned commission by commission and court appearance. By court appearance, these were not small things to walk away from. They were, she understood, the things she had built in order to be capable of doing the work she was now going to do. Every abstract she had processed, every title she had cleared, every boundary survey she had conducted in the Santa Fe Trail Country and the Tewa Basin and the Estancia Valley had been preparation. The preparation was complete. She rode east toward the Pecos with the January cold at her back and the Llano Estacado on the horizon before her, and the instrument case across the pommel of the bay horse she had bought to replace the roan, a solid, well-footed animal that she had selected with the particular care a person takes when selecting a horse for country they intend to stay in. She crossed into the Pecos drainage on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky enormous and pale blue above the Llano, the cedar breaks on the far bluffs holding their dark green through the winter, the river running low and clear in its January channel. The country came back to her with the full unreduced force of a place she had been keeping carefully in mind for 6 weeks, which is a different form of presence than actually being somewhere, but is not nothing. Morrow was at his gate. He had 2 horses ready, the buckskin for himself and the paint for her, the same as the first morning they had ridden out together, and she noted without surprise that the paint stood with its weight correctly distributed and its feet solidly placed in the specific way of a horse that has been well handled and recently exercised, as though he had been keeping it ready. He looked at her and at the bay horse she was riding, and at the instrument case. "You came back," he said. It was not surprise. It was the statement of a man confirming something he had believed, but that is better confirmed than simply believed. "I said I would," she said. "Yes," he said. He looked at the bay horse. "New horse." "For country I intend to stay in," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the full, unhurried attention that was his version of everything he felt, and had decided it was finally time to say without reservation. He came around the gate and he did not say anything more, and she did not need him to. He put his hand up and she took it, and he held it in the full and simple way of a man who has been certain for a long time and is glad at last to let it be plain. They stood at the gate in the January morning with the Pecos country wide and cold and clear around them, and there was nothing more that needed saying because what was true between them had been true since the evening she had come to his gate on a roan mare with a contract in her pocket, and he had said, "Come inside and I've got coffee on," and it had begun there and arrived here, in the way honest things arrive without fanfare, without announcement, simply present in the full weight of what it actually was. "Agnes Flood sent word," he said finally. "The commission examiner wrote to say the review is progressing as expected." "Good," she said. "Josephine arrives Thursday," he said. "I know," she said. "I had a letter." He looked at her with the corner of his mouth quality that she had come to find entirely reliable as a signal of something real. "She asked if you were the kind of person who gives legal advice over dinner," he said. "I am the kind of person who gives accurate legal advice wherever it's needed," she said. "That's what I told her," he said. She looked at the gate, at the board with Morrow burned into it, at the south fence line he had promised to work on, which was, she noted, demonstrably better than it had been in October. The post straighter, the wire taut, and evenly spaced, the work of a man who does what he says he will do in the plain and solid way that is the most reliable form of promise. "The county surveyor position," she said. "I heard they've had 2 inquiries," he said. "They've had 3, she said. "I wrote to the county commission last week, from Albuquerque." He looked at her. "Before you left," he said. "A person should not come back to a place without knowing what work is waiting for her," she said. Something settled completely in his face. He opened the gate. "Come in," he said. "I have coffee on." The south pasture fence, the actual south pasture fence, not the metaphor, took them 3 days to properly reset in the hard January ground. Violet had been right. It was not in order by the time she arrived, despite his work in December. The limestone breaks at the south end of the property gave nothing willingly. The posts had to be set in crevices and braced with rock, and the wire had to be run at specific tensions to account for the uneven terrain, and the whole section required 2 people working in the coordinated way that fence work in rocky ground requires, with one person holding the post and the other driving and then reversing, and then one person pulling wire while the other set the staples. She worked without complaint in the January cold in her canvas coat and heavy gloves, and she drove fence posts with the same methodical care she brought to everything else, steadily, correctly, without needing to be shown twice. He watched her work when he was not working himself with the specific attention of a man for whom watching someone do a thing well is one of the primary satisfactions available to a person paying attention. "Your father taught you to drive fence posts," he said on the second day. "My father taught me that a woman who understands the physical character of land is harder to cheat than one who only understands the paper description of it," she said. She drove another post. "He hired me out to a surveyor in the summers when I was 12 and 13. Field work. He said, learn what a measuring chain feels like in your hands, and you'll understand the number it produces." "He was right," Morrow said. "I was right about most things," she said. "He was wrong about the courts." "He was right about you," he said. She set the post maul on the post and looked at him. He was watching her with the full, unhurried attention that was his clearest form of expression, and there was nothing managed in it, and nothing performed, and it was, she thought, the most honest thing she had been looked at with in a very long time. "He trusted someone would come and finish what he couldn't," she said. That turned out to be right. "He trusted you specifically," Morrow said. "He trusted the work," she said, "and that the work would find the right person." She picked up the post maul. "He would have been glad it was me, but he would have cared more about the work being done right than about who did it." Morrow looked at the fence line running south to the sandstone breaks. "He taught you well," he said. She drove the last post of the day into the resistant limestone ground, solid and straight, and the sound of it rang across the cold, clear air of the Pecos country. Certain and final, the sound of a thing properly placed. Josephine Morrow arrived on a Thursday in the particular way young women of considerable capability arrive at places they have been anticipating, not tentatively, but with the specific forward momentum of someone who knows exactly why she is here and intends to use every moment of being here to the fullest. She was 28 years old, dark-haired like her father, with her mother's coloring and her grandfather's way of looking at things. The direct, unhurried assessment of a person who understands that looking at something properly is the necessary prerequisite to doing anything useful about it. She shook Violet's hand at the gate with a grip that said she meant the introduction as a real thing, not a formality. You certified 16 instruments in 10 days, she said. In Spanish, in field conditions. The families had the documents, Violet said. I had the training. The work was the work. My father's letters made it sound simpler than it was, Josephine said. She looked at Morrow, who had the expression of a man watching two people he respects meet each other with the cautious gladness of someone who hopes the meeting goes the way he thinks it will. He tends to understate. He does, Violet said. It's a family tendency, Josephine said. She looked at the drainage, the winter pecos pale and cold below the cedar breaks, the llano enormous beyond. Show me the drainage, all of it. I want to understand what we're protecting. They spent the first 2 days riding the full length of the claim area, Violet and Morrow and Josephine, visiting each of the families in turn. Josephine listened to each story with the complete contained attention of a person training herself to receive information she will later need to use precisely, and she asked questions that were exactly the right questions, not the questions of someone displaying knowledge, but the questions of someone building it. At Agnes Flood's kitchen table, she read Agnes's complete Messiah certificate, the page that had been returned now correctly in its place, and she said in the quiet tone of a law student, encountering something for the first time that she will spend years working with, this is clear, this is completely clear, there is nothing ambiguous in this document. No, Violet said. There never was. At the Sandoval place, Josephine met Thomas Broken Bow, who had come back from Santa Fe for a second working session with Petra Sandoval on the Pueblo land use documentation. She and Broken Bow were in conversation for 3 hours, during which Violet and Morrow sat on Petra Sandoval's porch in the January cold and drank coffee and were quiet in the comfortable way of two people who have learned to inhabit silence together. When Josephine came out, she looked as though she had been offered something she had not expected to be offered yet. The Pueblo documentation case, she said. Yes, Violet said. I want to work on that, Josephine said. When I'm called to the bar. I know, Violet said. Thomas will need someone. She paused. So will the 16 families when the commission review completes. The registry work, the boundary surveys, the permanent title filings that will take 2 years at minimum and requires someone with standing in the territorial courts. Josephine looked at her. You're asking me to come back here when I'm licensed, she said. I'm telling you the work will be here, Violet said. What you do about it is your decision. Josephine looked at her father. Morrow looked back at her with the expression of a man who is not going to say what he thinks about this and trust his daughter to arrive at her own correct conclusion. I'll think about it, Josephine said. She looked at the drainage. I'll probably say yes. I know, Violet said. On the evening of the second day after they had returned from the last homestead, and Josephine had gone to the room at the inn where Violet had been staying, Violet and Morrow stood at his gate in the January dark, with the stars enormous above the llano and the pecos, moving cold and quiet below the bluffs. She's going to be a good lawyer, Violet said. She's going to be better than good, he said. She's going to be the kind of lawyer that makes the Mimbres River families possible. He paused. Eventually. Eventually, Violet agreed. He looked at the gate, at the fence line running south in the dark, at the board with his name on it. There is something I've been thinking about since December, he said. Since the evening in my kitchen when you told me you were going back to Albuquerque first. He looked at her. I want to ask you something that is not about the work. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the full, clear attention that was the most honest thing about him. I asked you to stay, he said. You came back. I want to ask you something more than that. She waited. Marry me, he said. He said it with the same plain directness with which he said everything that mattered, without management, without elaborate preamble, without any of the performance that would have made it something lesser. Not because it's practical, though it is, and not because the work requires it, though the work will be better for it. Because I am certain. I have been certain since the evening you told me about your father and what it had cost him, and what you were going to do about it. And I have been waiting to ask until you had come back of your own accord, and not because I asked you to." He paused. "This is the right place. This is the right ground. And I believe I know you are the right person to stand on it with me." She looked at him in the January dark. She looked at the gate and the fence line and the board with his name. She thought about her father's instrument case and her name beside his on the leather MAVM, the smaller stamp added beside the larger one, the daughter's credential beside the father's, the continuation of work that was larger than either of them. She thought about Agnes Flood's tin box, in Bautista Vela's brandy, in Felicitas Parham's cornbread, in Hector Vela, standing at her door with his hat in his hands, and the missing page. She thought about the Sangre de Cristo passes in October, and the fire above the Gloretta, and what he had told her there, and what she had said, and what had settled between them in the silence after. She thought about 16 certified instruments in the Territorial Land Commission file, and what they said, and what the ground had always known, and the work of making the record say it. She thought about the south pasture fence, and 3 days in the January cold driving posts into limestone, working beside a man who did not manage her or soften things, or try to shape what she thought, who simply worked beside her with the full and practical and undemonstrative quality of a man who is glad you are here. "Yes," she said. He came forward and stood before her and looked at her the way he had looked at her at the commission office in Santa Fe, and at Agnes Flood's gate, and at the kitchen table after dark, and on every morning of riding the drainage together with the full, unhurried, entirely honest attention of a man who has found the right place to be and is done pretending he isn't glad to be there. He kissed her with the same quality, plain and certain, and without any of the performance that would have made it something other than what it was. They stood at the gate in the January night with the Pecos country wide and cold around them, and the stars enormous above the Llano Estacado, and there was nothing more that needed saying, because what was true between them had been true for a long time, and had simply finally arrived at its right and permanent form. The Commission's determination came in March on a Tuesday morning when the first real warmth of the new year was moving through the cedar breaks, and the Pecos was beginning its spring rise, and the meadowlarks were loud in the bottomland along the river. The examiner's letter arrived at Violet's desk. She had the county surveyor's office now in the courthouse at Santa Rosa, a south-facing room with good winter light and a flat drafting surface, and a window that looked toward the Pecos drainage, and she read it with the same full-level attention she brought to every document, beginning to end, before she allowed herself to know what she had already understood from the first line. The Territorial Land Commission of New Mexico hereby affirms the validity of 16 title instruments held under original Mesilla survey certifications dated 1854 and 1855 in the Guadalupe County drainage area, designated Pecos West tributary, said instruments to be recorded in the Federal Land Registry as confirmed titles under the provisions of the Treaty of Mesilla, 1853, with all associated water rights and access easements as described in the certified instruments attached hereto. The Santa Fe Basin Land Company's petition for the 3rd District Court had been dismissed with prejudice. The county sheriff had resigned pending a separate inquiry into conduct in office. Hector Vela had been appointed interim sheriff. Violet read the determination letter twice. She folded it and put it in the instrument case beside her father's dictionary. She went to find Morrow. I was at the Pecos, not at any particular place along it, but at the stretch of bank above Agnes Flood's south fence line, where the river came around the sandstone bend and ran clear and fast over the gravel bar, the place where the spring water looked exactly as the original Mesilla survey documents had described it, permanent, clear, and moving, in the course that had always been its course, and that no pen had ever honestly been able to change. I had come here to wait for her. She had known he would be here. She showed him the letter. He read it. He folded it and gave it back. He looked at the river. "The families should know today," he said. "We'll ride out this afternoon," she said. He looked at the water for a long moment. "Your father would have been satisfied," he said. "He would have said the record was right," she said. "He wasn't given to satisfaction." "No," he said, "but he would have felt it." She thought about that. She thought about the instrument case, and the dictionary, and the 16 kitchens, and the 30 years those families had been waiting for a record to say what the ground had always known. "Yes," she said, "he would have." I took her hand in the full and simple way of a man who has been certain for a long time and is glad now to let it be plain and permanent. She held it in the full and simple way of a woman who has come home by a longer road than she intended and found at the end of it exactly what the road was for. The Pecos ran. It ran where the survey documents said it ran, and where the iron boundary monuments in the limestone bank confirmed it ran, and where it had always run in its old channel cold and clear, and entirely indifferent to the arguments that had been made about it, waiting without impatience for the record to say what it already knew. They were married in April at the east pasture above the Morrow homestead, where the spring grass came up vivid green between the limestone outcrops, and the cedar held its dark color against the pale April sky, and the Pecos ran full and cold with the winter rains in the canyon below. The families from the drainage were there. Agnes Flood and Felicitas Parham, and the Vela family with Hector in his interim sheriff's badge, and the Reyes family, and the Sandovals, and a dozen more whose titles had been confirmed, and whose names were now in the permanent record of the territory as the rightful holders of what they had always held. Thomas Broken Bow was there, and Parrish from the Territorial Land Commission, who had made the 4-day ride from Santa Fe because he said in the plain and precise voice of a man who does not come to things lightly that he had wanted to see how this one turned out. Josephine Morrow stood beside her father in the April morning with the specific expression of a woman who is watching something she had hoped for and found exactly as she hoped, neither more elaborate nor more qualified than she had imagined, simply exactly right. Violet walked down the pasture slope toward Morrow in the spring morning with the instrument case at the house behind her and the certified documents in their file, and the work still ahead, the Sandoval Pueblo case, and the registry filings, and the boundary surveys, and all the years of doing this work correctly in a county that needed it done correctly. And she walked with the ease of a woman who has put down the weight of a long, careful distance, and found that what waited at the end of it was exactly what the distance had been necessary to reach. Morrow stood at the bottom of the slope and watched her come with the full, unhurried attention that was the most honest thing about him, and that she had understood since the October evening she first saw. It was the thing she had ridden out from Albuquerque not knowing she was looking for. She took his hand at the bottom of the slope. "Ready," he said. "I've been ready since January," she said. He smiled in the plain and unreserved way of a man who has stopped having any argument with what he feels. "I know," he said. "I've been watching you be ready." They were married with the cedar hills around them, and the Pecos Sound below, and the April sky enormous above, and the spring light on the new grass, and the record that said finally and permanently what the ground had always known. The year that followed the Commission's determination was the most productive season of professional work Violet had done since her early years in Albuquerque. Not because the work was easier, but because it was connected to ground and consequence in the way that changes the quality of everything you bring to it. She processed 16 title registrations from the certified instruments and conducted boundary surveys on 6 of the 16 parcels and prepared the complete registry documentation for the Federal Land Office. Each one worked through with the thoroughness of her father's training and the particular motivation of a person who understands that what she is building will outlast her and will be relied on by people who come after. Word moved through the territory the way it moves when something significant has happened, and the word is accurate. By autumn, she had inquiries from operations as far as Mora County and San Juan County, whose titles had been clouded by similar administrative gaps, the specific and ignored vulnerability of properties held under pre-territorial instruments that had never been properly integrated into the federal registry system. She could not take them all. She was one person with a surveyor's office and 16 confirmed registrations still in progress, and a Pueblo land tenure case that was going to take years, and a husband whose south fence line required ongoing attention, and a stepdaughter who was sitting the bar in the spring and had written to say she was in fact coming back to the drainage when she passed it. She took the ones she could do correctly. The ones she could not reach, she documented carefully and filed with the commission with a recommendation for qualified examiners building, as her father had built a record that would be useful to whoever came after, whoever had the right training and the right instruments, and was ready to do what the record required. On a December evening, when the first cold of the new winter had settled into the cedar breaks and the Pecos ran low and dark in its winter channel, she sat at the drafting table in the county surveyor's office, with the lamp turned up and the instrument case open beside her, and the work spread before her in the organized, methodical form she had been using since she was 17 years old. And she understood something she had been working toward for a very long time without quite having the language for it. Her father had told the families their titles were secure, and he had been right about the law and unable to make the law sufficient by itself. She had come and done what was needed to make it sufficient. The work was not complete, the Sandoval case was not complete, and the Mimbres River families were not yet reached, and there were other counties with other gaps between the law and its application. The work would not be complete in her lifetime, or in Josephine's probably. That was the nature of the work. But the record was honest. That was the thing her father had cared about most, and that was what she had done. Made the record honest in the specific cases she had been given to work on, with the instruments she had been given, and the training she had spent 16 years building, and the man who had stood beside her in the cedar breaks, and the limestone country, and known where every iron boundary pin in the drainage was located, and had been willing finally to put his name on a legal filing that said so. She had done what she came here to do. She was still doing it. She would go on doing it in the south-facing office with the Pecos drainage outside the window, and Morrow's gate visible from the road, and Josephine's room ready for spring. She closed the instrument case. She went home. Spring came to the Pecos drainage, the way it comes to the New Mexico high country, not gently, but with the full accumulated force of a season that has been building since February and is now entirely certain of itself. The Pecos ran high and cold with the snowmelt, and the cedar breaks greened up, and the buffalo grass came in vivid on the slopes above the river, and the meadowlarks returned to the bottomland with the specific loud certainty of birds that know they own the territory they are singing in. Josephine passed the bar in March. She came back to the drainage in April. On the morning she arrived, Violet met her at the gate with a cup of coffee and the Sandoval case file, 300 pages of accumulated documentation. The Spanish instruments and the Mexican certifications and the Pueblo land use statement and Thomas Brokenbow's analysis and the precedent research and the correspondence with the commission organized in the precise, cross-referenced format that her father had used for everything he cared about. Josephine took the file with both hands in the way of someone receiving something they have been waiting for. "Where do we start?" she said. "The Pueblo statement," Violet said. "It's the oldest document. Start with what the land knew first." Josephine opened the file. She read the first page, the Sandoval family's Pueblo land use statement, the document that predated every other claim on this drainage by 2 generations in the notation system of the people who had been here first. And she looked up with the expression Violet recognized from the first time she herself had read it, the quiet, absolute conviction of a professional encountering something real. "This is right," Josephine said. "Yes," Violet said. "It always has been." She handed Josephine a cup of coffee, and they walked toward the surveyor's office in the April morning, with the Pecos running in its spring channel below them, and the Llano Estacado gold, and enormous on the horizon, and the whole country in its first vivid green of the year, alive and certain and entirely itself. The work went on. End of the weight of a deed. The Sandoval case took 3 years. It was not a straight road, no case involving the intersection of 3 legal traditions across 2 centuries of colonial and territorial history was ever going to be a straight road. There were setbacks. A commission examiner who ruled that the Pueblo land use statement was insufficiently certified for the evidentiary standard required, necessitating a challenge filed by Josephine in her first month of practice that kept her in Santa Fe for 6 weeks. There were complications. The discovery that a portion of the Sandoval claim had been transferred under a fraudulent survey during Creed's administration, requiring Violet to produce a corrected boundary plat from the original GLO monuments and file it in the Federal Registry under 3 separate instruments. There were also the things that made the road worth taking. Petra Sandoval. The afternoon the commission accepted Thomas Brokenbow's amended petition, sitting at her kitchen table in the shade of the cottonwoods with her hands folded and her face carrying the specific contained expression of a woman who has been asked to be patient for a very long time and has found finally that the patience was not wasted. Old Bautista Vela, riding out to the surveyor's office in the rain to deliver a bottle of the brandy he had been saving, the right one this time, not the stand-in he had offered before. He set it on the desk without ceremony and said in Spanish that his father would have wanted the right person to have it and that he believed they had found her. Agnes Flood's kitchen on the evening. The final registry confirmation arrived, sitting around the table with Agnes and Felicitas Parham and the Reyes family, and Morrow and Josephine and Thomas Brokenbow. The whole drainage represented in that one kitchen and outside the window. The September evening going gold on the cedar breaks, and the Pecos running below the bluffs the way it had always run. The thing about the work Violet had come to understand was that it did not stop because it was finished. It stopped because it was right. There was a difference, and the difference was the thing her father had been teaching her with every certified document and every careful margin annotation, and every commission he had taken and done correctly. The work is not what you produce. The work is the quality of what you bring to what the situation requires. She had brought everything she had. The situation had required everything she had. The record was right. That was the whole of it. That was enough. On an October morning in the fourth year after the commission's determination, Violet stood at the Pecos Bank above Agnes Flood's south fence line, with the river running clear and low in its autumn channel below her. She was there for no particular professional reason, no boundary survey, no document work, no family waiting at a kitchen table with a tin box of papers that needed reading. She was there because it was October and the cedar brakes were going dark green against the pale sky, and the buffalo grass on the slopes above the river was gold, the way it was every autumn in this country. And because she had learned in 4 years of living in the Pecos drainage that there was a kind of attention the country required that was not professional and not instrumental, but simply the attention of a person being present in a place they have understood finally as theirs. Morrow came up behind her. She had learned his step on this ground years ago, the particular unhurried stride of a man who moves through familiar terrain with the ease of someone who has made his peace with it. He stood beside her and said nothing, which was his way of saying everything that needed to be said about being present. The Pecos ran. She opened her field book. She opened it to the page she had been carrying for 4 years, the last page. With writing the note she had made on the afternoon, she first understood what the drainage required of her and what it had to give. She read what she had written. This ground is right. She looked at the river, at the iron boundary monument set in the limestone bank above the waterline. The GLO survey pin, 30 years old, solid and straight in the rock, stamped with the territorial surveyor's mark, saying in the permanent language of iron and stone what every certified document in the commission file now also said. She wrote a second line beneath the first. The record says so. She closed the book. She stood at the river in the October morning with the cedar brakes holding their color in the flat autumn light, and the Llano Estacado pale and enormous on the horizon, and the Pecos running cold and clear in its old channel. Run away, it had always run before anyone put a fraudulent pen to the documents that described it, and after those documents had been put right, running the way it would run long after everyone who had argued about it was gone, and the arguments themselves were only a footnote in the permanent record of what the ground had always known. She had what she had come for. She had what she had not come expecting. She had the work and the ground and the man beside her and the daughter who was already becoming the lawyer. The members river families would one day need, and the office with the south-facing window, and the drafting table, and the instrument case, and her father's dictionary with its careful annotations, and the understanding finally and permanently that the distance she had spent 16 years putting between herself and work, that was connected to consequence, had not been wrong, it had been preparation. The preparation was complete. The work went on. Morrow put his hand over hers in the full and simple way of a man who has been certain for a long time and has no further argument with what he already knows. She held it in the full and simple way of a woman who has come home by the right road and found at the end of it exactly what the road was for. The October cool was all around them, and the meadowlarks called once in the bottomland below the fence clear, and certain the way a bird calls in country. It has decided is entirely its own, and the river ran correctly over the limestone, and the land held what it had always held. The record said so. End of the weight of a deed. The commission review of the Sandoval Pueblo documentation formally concluded on a Wednesday in March in the 5th year after Violet first rode into the Pecos drainage on a roan mare with a contract she had not yet understood in her coat pocket. Josephine brought the determination letter from Santa Fe. She rode the 4 days back without stopping except to rest the horse, and she came into the surveyor's office on a Friday morning with the letter already open in her hand, and her face carrying the expression Violet recognized from the afternoon she had read the Sandoval document for the first time, the quiet, absolute conviction of someone who has been given confirmation of something she has always known to be true. The commission has affirmed, Josephine said. She set the letter on the desk. Full recognition of the Sandoval family's Pueblo land use document as a valid pre-sovereign instrument of title under the federal trust obligation. The Sandoval claim is confirmed in all 3 layers. Violet read the letter from the first line to the last. She set it down. She looked at the drafting table, the instrument case, the dictionary, the commission file that had taken 3 years to build. She looked at the south-facing window and the October light on the cedar brakes in the Pecos running below. Take it to Petra today, she said. Don't wait. I know, Josephine said. She picked up the letter with both hands. She looked at Violet with the full attention she had been developing since the first week she arrived on the drainage and took up the Sandoval file, the full attention of a woman who is still learning what it means to bring everything you have to work that requires everything you have, and is learning it faster than most people do because she has been given the right ground to learn it on. Thomas said to tell you this is the precedent, that every Pueblo land use document in the territory now has a path that it didn't have before. I know, Violet said. He said it couldn't have been done without the Messiah certifications establishing the chain below it, Josephine said. He said tell Corrigan her father's work was the foundation. We built on what he left. Violet looked at the dictionary on the corner of the desk. Tell him the foundation was always there, she said. We just had to read it correctly. Josephine nodded. She went out. Violet sat at the desk for a long time in the Friday morning light. She thought about her father riding out from Albuquerque in 1873 with his instrument case and his Spanish dictionary and his careful, honest intention to make the records say what the law required, and his inability for reasons that were not entirely his fault and were not entirely adequate as an excuse to finish what finishing required. She thought about what it had cost the families on this drainage. She thought about the 30 years between his certification and hers. She thought about what he would have said if she had been able to tell him how it ended. He would have said the work was right. He would have said the record held. He would have said those things in the plain and direct manner of a man for whom the quality of the work was the most permanent statement a person ever made about themselves, and he would have meant them without qualification or excess, and they would have been exactly right. She stood up from the desk. She put on her coat and picked up her field book and walked out of the surveyor's office into the March morning. Mora was at the corral gate. He had heard Josephine's horse arrive and knew from the pace of it that she was coming with news worth riding fast for, and he had been waiting with the specific patience of a man who has learned that the right thing to do with important news is to let it arrive in its own time and receive it honestly. He looked at her face before she spoke. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. He looked at her with the full, unhurried attention that was she had understood since October of the year. She arrived the thing about him that would outlast everything else. Not the work or the legal arguments or even the determination letters from territorial commissions, but this specific quality of presence, this willingness to look at what was in front of him with complete honesty and no management of what it meant. Your father built the foundation, he said. You finished it. We finished it, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. We did. She took his hand. The March morning was cold and clear around them, and the Pecos ran somewhere below the cedar breaks in its spring rise, and the Llano Estacado stood enormous and patient on the eastern horizon as it always had, indifferent to the arguments of courts and commissions and entirely certain of what it was. The record was right. The ground held what it had always held. The work went on.